Please visit Unfound's social media sites at Facebook, Twitter, now known as the X, TikTok, and Instagram. And do not forget Unfound's website, theunfoundpodcast.com. Even though the FBI plays a role in disappearance investigations in the United States, really, we haven't talked about the Bureau much over the past 8 years. Well, today, you get to hear from one of their own, including some of the well-known cases she has consulted on. And hey, she is also a podcaster. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. But first, Unfound news. If you haven't heard already, I'm in Pennsylvania, and coincidentally, I'm seated less than a mile from where the attempted assassination of Donald Trump occurred. Yes, this is where my father lives. I made a video of the area that you can now find on Unfound's YouTube channel. Next, the largest project in Unfound's history has begun. In fact, if I may, this is not only the largest project in the podcast's history, it is the single largest disappearance analysis project that has ever been done. When it is done, you will get to see it. Finally, the live show is being moved to Tuesday, July 23rd for 1 week and 1 week only. Why? Because I'm going to see a concert on July 22nd. Who is playing? Winger. Yes, really. A note before my talk with Julia starts. This is a long interview, so I've broken it up into separate episodes, at least the non-YouTube versions, so none of you would become too intimidated about listening to the whole thing. But that's the thing. Please listen to all of it. There is a lot to be learned about how the FBI actually goes about its business, in contrast to how the Bureau is perceived in true crime or how Hollywood portrays it. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound retired FBI profiler and podcast host, Julia Cowley. Julia, welcome to Unfound.
Hello, Ed. Thank you for having me.
And before we get started, I have to give a shout out to a mutual friend of ours, Caroline Lowe, who I guess kind of introduced us some months ago when you covered on your podcast Jody Husentrut's disappearance. Mm-hmm. And then we had some conversations. And then just recently I'd reached back out to you and asked you if you'd come and appear on Unfound, and I'll be appearing on your podcast at some point in the future. So a shout out to Caroline Lowe, who said, they're going to be covering, you really should take an interest in this podcast and Julia and the work that she's doing there. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And I just want to say my side of the story here is you please. Emailed me and you had a ton of questions for me, and they were very detailed questions and thoughtful questions, and clearly you knew the case. And I started to email you back, and I thought, this is going to be too long. It's, all my answers would be, well, it depends on this, depends on that. And so when we had a chance to talk, I just felt like we had a great conversation initially. And I thought we need to collaborate or talk some more, because we each have, some experience we can bring to these types of cases. So I'm grateful that Caroline put us in contact.
Right. That was a great conversation regarding
it was.
Yeah, very good. And if listeners, maybe somebody's new to Unfound, Unfound covered Jody's disappearance, I think late 2019 or late 2020, sometime going back at least 4 or 5 years now, if anybody wants to check that out. Whereas your coverage was much more recently.
Yes, it was back in 2023. Yeah, it wasn't that long. Yeah, it was more recent. And I think what brought the case to my attention, I'd heard of the case. I saw it on like 48 hours. I've seen it covered by multiple types of podcasts and TV shows and things like that. But Caroline had reached out, and as you know, Caroline is very dedicated to keeping that case alive. And so she had reached out and asked if we'd take a look at it. And so we did.
Yeah. Start right here. You're being interviewed today. As much as you would like to say, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. If you want to talk about your interests, your hometown, and of course, we'll eventually get into how did you end up getting into the FBI, but just about a little bit about Julia Cowley, the person.
Sure. Well, I'm mostly from the West Coast. I grew up in Northern California and then Central Oregon. I did spend a little time in Georgia as part of my childhood as well, but not a lot of time. Most of my memories are from Central Oregon, from middle school through high school, and I went to the University of Oregon. So I consider Oregon my home state.
Go Ducks.
Yeah, go Ducks. I'm a Duck through and through. I'm a huge Duck fan. So, so that's where I grew up, and I grew up in a small town, very rural town, farming industry, logging industry, and I was very active, loved sports, and I have mom and dad, brothers and sisters, and it was kind of a split family because my parents divorced when I was young. Wow. So we had like a combined family. So I had half brother or a step brother and stepsister, and we grew up all together. And I mean, I consider them my brother and my sister, but so that was how I grew up, and went to high school and then college. And you'd asked, I think, about my education, and I got a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and then I went on and got my master's degree in forensic science.
Wow, chemistry.
Yes.
I have bad memories of chemistry.
Most people do.
Yeah.
And I tell people I didn't, it was hard. Could be challenging, but it was a lot of memorization, and I have a good memory. So I felt like I could do well at it. And it really, and I know we'll get into this, but I was very interested in true crime from a young age, and I thought long and hard about what I wanted to do, and I got very interested in forensic science. So that's why I majored in chemistry. I was good at science and hoping to work someday in a crime lab. So that's why I went down that path.
Okay. All right. So even before, let's just say going back to high school, you'd taken an interest in true crime, disappearances, murders, serial killers, anything like that. Maybe before you became a professional, what were maybe some of the cases, if you remember any, that kind of, caught your attention as a teenager, let's say?
Well, sure. The first case that I really got interested in was the Tate LaBianca murders that were committed by Charles Manson and the Manson family. Sure. So I read Helter Skelter. My mother was reading it, and I was in middle school, and she was reading it. She read a lot of true crime. She told me that I was too young to read it, but when she was done with it, I read it anyway. She didn't know, and I was hooked. Absolutely hooked on reading true crime. I'd go to the bookstore and libraries and look for true crime books. So that was the first case that I became very interested in. And then when I was in high school, some of the big cases, one was the Diane Downs, and she was convicted of killing her children, 3 children. She shot and killed them. And this was in Oregon. So it was very high profile where I was growing up, and she was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey. And so it was a really big deal. So that was a high profile case. Then another case that I became particularly interested in was, was a book called The Blooding by Joseph Wambaugh. And it was a story of when DNA was first used in a criminal case. And it was in the UK, and it was used in a serial murder investigation. So I was interested in that case. And then, of course, I read Mindhunter by John Douglas, I think after that. And that is what got me interested in potentially becoming an FBI profiler. So that's kind of my history with true crime.
Once again, before you were a professional, this is just taking it as an amateur, is a hobby or just a general interest type of thing.
I read every true crime book I could get my hands on. And I would go to the bookstores because the libraries weren't stocked with them. They're not always appropriate books, I guess. And they didn't have, I don't recall in my hometown library a big section on true crime, but I would go to bookstores when I could and just sit there and go through and pick out a book. And I read about every case I could. So I was fascinated with it and fascinated with how they were solved. And
I have to admit, being that you're from Northern California, you didn't say the Zodiac Killer. That was not something that maybe caught your attention, given that
it definitely caught my attention, but because it had happened so long prior to, I just wasn't a case that I was like following the way the way I kind of did them. Not that the Manson murders happened; they happened before I was born. But it just, I was interested in that. I was also interested, in Ted Bundy. Obviously, he offended in the Northwest as well. And all of that fascinated me. Zodiac, Ted Bundy. Oh, there's a lot of serial killers from the Northwest, I think.
And we're going to get into the original Night Stalker a little later, but that's going to be in the context of you being a professional. So if everybody's, well, he was out there in the Northern California too. We'll get to it a little later. So you're into science, you're into chemistry. You go to school, you go to the University of Oregon, you get your degree, and then forensic science. How does the FBI, did you go directly to the FBI, or was there any kind of things in between, but maybe just what eventually led you to the FBI?
Sure. So after I got done with school, I worked for a short period of time for a biotech company, but my ultimate goal was to get into a crime lab. So I was working for a biotech company, interviewing for various positions, and I interviewed with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and they hired me. So I moved at this point, I was living in Northern California, working for the biotech company, I was in the Bay Area, and I drove across country from California to Tennessee with all my belongings and a Ford Taurus that I rented because I didn't have my own car yet. And I rented and just moved to Tennessee. And the only time I'd ever been to Tennessee was for my interview. I went to Nashville for my interview there. And I started in a crime lab, and it was a big decision to make, but it was probably one of the best career decisions that I made because it was a great agency to work for. I got a lot of really good hands-on experience. I was not only working in the crime lab, I was a toxicologist, but I was also a member of their crime scene team. So we'd go out to homicide scenes and collect evidence. Wow. So I had some really good training, hands-on training when we went through our academy. It was like a mini academy for forensic scientists. And so we did the training, and then I did all the hands-on work and worked with people that were more experienced than I was. And then ultimately became a team leader on my own there as well. And, it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. And then I had a coworker who had applied to the FBI, and he joined about 2 years before I applied. But that's what got me thinking, maybe I want to try going into the FBI.
Okay. Going from North Carolina to Tennessee, a little bit of a culture shock, maybe?
Oh, from California?
Yes.
Yes and no. It was a little bit of a culture shock, I think. I do remember I was walking with one of my coworkers, and she said, "You're going to have to learn to slow down. You just walk too fast."
Yes.
So,
gotcha.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm a type of person I can fit in anywhere. So I loved living there. I loved the experience that I had. I loved my job. I met some really great people, some very talented people that I learned a lot from. I learned lessons that I remember to this day from people. So it was a big risk to take. go. I mean, I was all on my own. I didn't know anybody. And I'm just really glad and fortunate that I did do it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it was different. It was a different way of life, but I really did enjoy it there.
Okay.
Very
So
much
how long
so.
were you with TBI before you went on with the FBI? How long were you there?
About 4 years.
About 4 years. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you're there, I guess, enjoying it, doing, what's in your line of work, your experience with, of course, going to crime scenes and dealing with science and everything. You get hired by the FBI. But of course, even on your podcast, you label yourself a profiler. You're not like in the science, you're looking more at the psychology. Is that something that happened right when you got started with the FBI, or is that something that happened later? Maybe get into the FBI. And of course, we want to just talk about the FBI in general, but how did that all change over time?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't walk in the door. I mean, I joined the FBI with a dream of maybe someday becoming a profiler. That
Okay.
was my dream. But also, I was realistic, and the recruiters are very realistic with you. It's difficult to become an FBI profiler. So many people, especially at that time, because the movie The Silence of the Lambs had really piqued people's interest in profiling, and a lot of people were joining the FBI saying they want to be a profiler. And so the recruiters would tell you the chances of you becoming a profiler are pretty slim. So I realized that, I might not ever have the opportunity, but I still wanted to join the FBI, be an investigator. I mean, while I love the work in the crime lab, it became very routine. The day-to-day work of toxicology, and I really loved going out to the homicide scenes, but those were not an everyday occurrence. It is something we maybe did once or twice a month, and I really did enjoy that. So what I was hoping for when I joined the FBI was to be in charge of my own investigations, not a small part of it, but just run an investigation. And I think that's what I was looking forward to. And that's what you do when you first join the FBI. You don't have a say really in where you go. You get to list all 56 field offices, number one choice all the way down to number 56. And you hope that they take that into consideration. We used to joke around that there's just a monkey in the back room throwing a dart, and that's how they're making their decisions.
Come on, Hawaii. Come on, Hawaii.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to keep, because of my husband, he was from upstate New York, and he didn't necessarily want to be on the West Coast, and I kept my choices sort of, in the Northeast and the South, the Southeast kind of area, just kind of on this side of the country. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have a choice. I ended up in Boston. You also don't, and I was happy with that. It was number 16. I think every
she remembers the number. That's funny. Okay.
Yeah. That's think funny. Every student, it's a big orders night is a big night. It's like week 6, at least when I was going through the FBI Academy, it was week 6, and you get up in front of the class, they hand you an envelope, you open the envelope in front of everybody, and you're supposed to say, okay, I think you're supposed to say like what your number one choice was, what your last choice was, and then you're supposed to open it and announce where you're going and what number that was on your list. And so I think everybody remembers what number they got. And I got number 16, which actually wasn't too bad for my class. There were a few people, I think one of my classmates got number 54 on their list. So
well, I guess given the numbers, 1 out of 56, the average is going to be like that 28. So yeah, you were above the average, I guess.
Yeah, it was funny because my first choice was the Washington D.C. office. Yeah, and I really was confident I was going to get it because it's a big office, and the class right before mine, 11 people from that class went to Washington D.C. So I thought, well, sure, I'm going to go. But I guess they took the opportunity to take all those students and fill all the spots in the Washington office. So I was surprised. And then, then I kind of thought like Boston's a pretty cool place. I'd been to Boston once for a vacation. And so, and then also, not only do you not get to choose where you go, you don't get to choose what you work or where you're assigned, at least not your first choice. And it's really the needs of the office. Where do they have an opening? And many times, those openings maybe don't align with what your background is. I mean, we fill out forms for the field office and tell them, what our experience is, what we would like to work. Again, I don't think they really take that into consideration. So I ended up on a bank fraud squad, and I didn't have any real financial background. And I was disappointed, but I also was very much aware that there was a high probability I could go to a white collar squad. And again, looking back, and I have a positive attitude about things. I tend to look at things in a positive way, but looking back, I realized that was really good for me. I learned how to be a good case agent. And, I think I was already very good at paying attention to detail, but, that taught me how to document cases and be very detailed. And, I met my best friend in the bureau on that squad. So a lot of good things came from that. And I didn't want to be somebody that complained, because I felt like, listen, if I sit here and complain about this and I'm disappointed that I didn't end up on a violent crime squad, which is where I really wanted to go, then nobody's going to want to work with me if I'm not doing my job. And that's how I viewed it. So I try to just have a really positive attitude about it. And then after about 3 years, I went to public corruption civil rights, which was another big surprise, but it was a really good squad in our office. They had some really talented senior agents, and that ended up being the best thing in the world. It was a lot of variety. I love the work. So that's what I did. And I was also a member of the evidence response team. So I kept up my skills in the area of forensic science as well.
So how long were you in bank fraud, and how long then in your second job there, how long were you in that? What kind of time span are we talking about there?
Oh, 11 years total. So about 3 years bank fraud, and then about 8 years public corruption, civil rights.
Okay, so you, I guess what maybe saying that being that you eventually wanted to become a profiler, I guess you had to be really patient on this.
Oh, yes.
11 years, it's a long time for anybody, I guess, in any career. That's longer, that's way longer than a professional athlete career or anything. You had to be really patient before you kind of finally found, you reached your goal there, I guess.
You have to be very patient, and because they, when you apply, they don't take brand new agents into the behavioral analysis unit. You have to have many years of investigation first. You have to have that investigative experience first before you can even be considered. So it does take a lot of patience. You can't walk right in the door and say, I want to be a profiler. I mean, you can say that, but it's not going to, like I did. Yeah.
All right, kid. All right, we hear you. We hear you, kid.
And that's how it was. That's how it was. I at one point, we had the opportunity as new agents to talk to supervisors whose squads we were interested in going to. And I talked to the violent crime supervisor at the time, and I told him, well, I would like to be a profiler someday. And I remember he said, well, that's scary stuff. And like, I know, sir, I know, and I don't know that he realized that I had worked many violent crime scenes. I had seen terrible things, and I knew I could handle that work. That wasn't, but it was funny. It's like, that's scary stuff. And so, yep. I'm
let me just ask you maybe a little bit about, so we're just saying bank fraud. We're not talking like bank robberies. We're talking, is that the same thing, or is that something different, or?
We're talking about, taking out, fraudulent loans, or bank employees who are embezzling or committing loan fraud. Like I investigated someone who, she was a bank manager, and she had been creating fictitious loans and taking the money and things like that. So that was, and people that would provide false information to get loans on fraudulent basis. And it was not the most exciting work, I'll say, but I did enjoy it. It was not something that I wanted to do my entire career, but I learned a lot. And
I'm thinking, once again, I know nothing about bank fraud or bank robberies. It's really not what we do on Unfound. But I'm thinking maybe in those 3 years, you're probably encountering a lot of people who are lying to you. Being that I'm sure these people aren't confessing to these crimes or anything, and no, I didn't. So maybe that gives you kind of an insight into like the psychology of people who commit crimes but claim that they didn't. Is that that's kind of what I think of when I think of like a bank manager, writing themselves own loans and everything, that when they're confronted, they're going to just say, no, I didn't do this. It's a paperwork problem or something.
Yeah. In a couple of the cases, like my very first case, the confession was not an issue at all. In fact, what had happened was the person went home because she had been embezzling. This was the one, making fictitious loans and under customer names and things like that. And she was, just by all intents and purposes, a very, I guess, good person that you would view as a good person. She was church going, married for a long time, had children. I think everyone saw her as very good hearted, and the money that she had been stealing, she'd spend on her children and things like that. And she had not missed a day of work in like 20 years. And it just got so bad that she didn't come into work one day. She ended up telling her husband everything she had been doing. And that's how she got discovered. So it wasn't hard to get that confession. It was like the bank just called up and said, we have a problem.
Yeah. All right, let's continue. All right. So bank fraud, 8 years in civil rights.
Public corruption, civil rights cases.
Civil rights. Mm-hmm. And so tell me about the day that you found out that, you're going to get on the trail to being a profiler. Do you remember that? How did that all come about?
Well, one of the things that I did is I applied to be what's called an NCAVC coordinator, which is the NCAVC stands for the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime. And it is the section of the FBI that encompasses all of the behavioral analysis units. And at the time, there were 3 units. There was BAU1, terrorism threats, BAU2, crimes against adults, and BAU3, crimes against children. And so a coordinator position is a position out in the field, in a field office, which acts as a liaison between the BAUs and state and local law enforcement. So people that are looking for services. So you promote the program, and if there's a case that a local police department wants the FBI's behavioral analysis unit to look at, you act as a conduit to that. You help them prepare their materials, get everything sent, you send down. And it's a stepping stone. It's a way to be exposed to the criminal profiling process and to be involved and get to know people. And so I applied for that position, and every office can have multiple positions. It doesn't have to just be one. And we had a few. We had one in Boston, and then of course, we have satellite offices, which we call resident agencies, and there were other coordinators in the resident agency. So we had a few, and there was an opening, and I applied for it, and I was selected. And so that's how I got started. And I think once I got my foot into the door with that, that was pretty helpful in gaining experience and, preparing to, and seeing if this is really, in fact, something I want to do as well. Because you have this idea of what it would be like. Sure. And this exposes you to that. And is this really what I want to do? Because I really, really loved my job in Boston, especially when I, doing the public corruption and civil rights. Okay. And I loved working in Boston. And so it's a big step to think of moving. And so this was an exposure to that. And I love doing that as well. So that's how I started. So I was doing my public corruption, civil rights investigations. I was a member of the evidence response team. And then I was an NCAVC coordinator.
Okay. And so did you then have to move are you saying that you had to move from Boston when that all happened or what?
Yes.
You did?
Yes, I had to move And I moved down to Virginia with my family. So when I was selected, so there was an opening, and it was in the Crimes Against Adults unit, which is the unit that I wanted to be a part of. So I applied for that specific job and was selected. And as a result of that, I had to move from Boston and move down to Virginia, which is where the behavioral analysis units are. It's in an office like right outside Quantico. I know some people from the movie The Silence of the Lambs, you think of BAUs in the basement of the academy. It's no longer there. Okay. It used to be many years ago, but there's an offsite now. It has its own building.
Okay, and we're going to get into a little bit here in a little bit about the way the FBI is portrayed as to actually how it is. But we want to talk a little bit more about you. All right, so you moved down to Virginia. When you say crime against adults, what does that all encompass?
So it's really any kind of bizarre, unusual, unsolved type of case where the victim is an adult, meaning 18 years or older. And we worked a variety of different types of cases. I think most people know or think that the BAU mostly focuses on serial murder. We do, but serial murder is a rare occurrence. So we also work, as we'll discuss, some missing person cases, serial sexual assault cases, even sexual assault cases, just, and I will say regular sexual assault cases, but we will work those. Single homicides, double homicide cases that are not part of a series, that we do interview strategies. And one of the things, and I think one of the reasons why I was selected is at the time, the FBI, the Crimes Against Adults unit was starting to do some research into high-level white-collar offenders. And they were looking for somebody who kind of had a background not only in violent crime, but also white-collar crime.
And
I mean, unbelievable, right?
Right. TBI, bank fraud, it all came together.
It did. It really, I was very, very lucky, and my timing was really, I mean, I think if they didn't have some with a white collar experience, they probably would have chosen somebody else. I mean, it wasn't absolutely required, but I think that's what helped me, is that I actually did have that experience. And so not only did I work violent crime, but I did work a little bit of white collar crime and most of that was interview strategy type cases where, so they're going to, a big white collar case, they're going to go interview somebody and they want the best strategy to conduct the interview of that person. So, but those cases, the program was certainly building, but the majority of our work was violent crime.
Okay. Now I have to ask you, the way I understand it, once again, I don't have any law enforcement background. I didn't go to school for law enforcement or anything like that. But just from a jurisdictional point of view, we usually consider, at least in the United States, of course, Unfound has listeners outside the United States. So their situations as far as government and investigations may be different. But here in the United States, most violent crimes are considered to be like states things or local things, like cities investigated or state police. So we're talking about the federal government of the United States, which certainly does have a jurisdiction on, but I think everybody has to understand, we start talking about violent crime in the United States, mostly we're talking about the number one jurisdiction being local or state and not federal. So maybe you can explain that a little bit and how the FU would get involved, even though a lot of these crimes are actually going to be, the first jurisdiction is going to be more local. Please, can you explain that?
Sure. So you're right. Typically, the FBI, murder in and of itself is not a federal crime. There has to be some sort of nexus of some sort to, whether it's a kidnapping or crossing state lines or something like that. So the majority of our cases in the Crimes Against Adults unit were not FBI cases, and the FBI wouldn't have typical jurisdiction over them. So these cases we would get involved in at the request of the agency, and they'd have to make a formal request for FBI assistance. And that's all it is. It's assistance. We do not take over the investigation. The investigation remains with that agency. They remain the lead agency. And anything we provide them, they can take it or leave it. They don't have to listen to us. We can only advise, we can only maybe provide a profile or suggestions but it's their case. It remains their case. As you mentioned, TV, unlike TV, we don't come and take over. Now, that's not to say we didn't work some cases that there was, and, the lead was the FBI. We did do some of those cases, but the majority of our work were, cases that were the jurisdiction of state or local agencies.
Mm-hmm. And how often, how much does that happen in your career? Does that happen a lot? I mean, how many requests do you usually get from local law enforcement to get involved? Have a feel for that?
I don't know number. I really don't, but we were very busy. I can tell you we were very busy, and we would get requests from not only all over the country, but some other countries. And I wasn't fortunate enough to travel to other countries, but there were agents that would go assist in other countries and on cases and provide not only training, but assistance, the same we would do here in the United States. So, at any given point, I'm just trying to think about how many cases I would carry, maybe 10 to 15 cases at a time, some of them requiring a lot more work than others. For example, a serial murder case requires a lot more work than a single homicide,
Right.
because you're looking at several incidents as opposed to one incident. And you may do a one-time consultation and they don't call you back, or you continue to assist along the way. Like you may spend a year, they give you updates and you provide more guidance. So, every case required a different amount of attention and work. But I would say at any given time, I had about 10 or 15, I think. And then when I was in the unit, there were 8 profilers. So these are crimes against adults unit. Some may have had more cases or less cases, just depending on what their workload was at the time. Some of my cases required, it was a lot of work.
So when we're talking about these cases, are we usually generally talking what we might, just the generic term of cold cases, or more like what we would then call, quote unquote, nobody could see me doing this, but quote unquote, new cases, or what? Or maybe you should ask you this, maybe what would be the stereotypical reason that local law enforcement also would want to get the FBI involved?
Most of the cases that I dealt with were cold or colder, or cold, lukewarm, maybe.
Okay.
Is a better way to put it, where maybe 2 or 3 years have passed and they've run out of leads. They're looking for ideas, suggestions, a profile. Maybe they have some suspects and they want to try to prioritize those suspects, and maybe a profile can assist with that. Those were the typical cases. Now, we got some cases that were very old as well. And there were a couple of times we were assisting on cases that were fast moving, breaking right away. That's rare. Most of the cases you had time. There'd been a lot of time had passed, and it's almost sometimes I would joke around with people that when the psychic didn't work, then they'd come to the BAU.
Oh my.
So it is kind of like, I think, a lot of times many cases start off where they think, I don't want to say they think it's going to be easy, but there's a lot of leads and they're busy and they're making progress. And then after a couple of years, they realize, maybe we need another set of eyes to look at this. And those, I think, were the majority of the cases that I worked on. And it didn't, even though we looked at a lot of the, bizarre, repetitive type of crimes, some of these just weren't. They weren't that bizarre. They were homicides, and there wasn't anything, crazy about them. There wasn't necessarily a suspected serial killer. They were just, and I use this term loosely, routine homicides, where investigators had kind of hit a dead end. and they were looking for a review. And that's what a review, an assessment, new ideas, things like that.
Okay. Now, going back to you specifically, all right, is this like some sort of continuing education? You're in the FBI already. You've already been there for many years. And so do they send you like for additional training, like schooling for being a profiler? Or maybe let's get into that now, please.
Yes. So the training to become what's called a certified profiler, which means you're certified by the FBI in behavioral analysis, it's a 1 to 2 year process. And I know the training has been revamped over the years, but when I went through, we had 16 weeks, which was actually the same as the FBI Academy of training, and or not of training, of classroom work, where you had lectures, and they were not only lectures from current profilers, but experts, outside experts would come in, like forensic psychiatrists and psychologists, and experts in crimes against children, and medical examiners. And so we had a lot of classroom and different topics. And we also had opportunities to work as a class through cases. So somebody would come in and present a case, and we'd work on it together as a class and kind of see what we could come up with in terms of a profile. So, and then after that, once you get through the classroom, then you have to work cases in each of the units. So at the time, there were only 3 units. Now they've expanded to 5 units. But so I had to work 2 cases in each unit with a certified profiler. So I had to work 2 cases in the terrorism threat units, the 2 cases in crimes against adults, which is where I was going to be assigned, and 2 cases in the crimes against children's unit. And you work alongside certified profilers that act as your mentors. And then you have to attend a certain number of consultations, which means you just go and you participate in the consultation, and they require you to attend, so many single homicides, so many terrorism cases. And you have to, all this is documented. It's documented in like a workbook. And at the end, when you're done with all of it, you have to write up the completion of all your training. There were some other things as well. You had to attend certain classes outside the FBI. I had to attend a class at we went to the Baltimore medical examiner's office, and we attended a week-long class there where we exposed to forensic medicine and autopsies and things like that. We had to give presentations both inside and outside of the Bureau as well. So there's a lot of requirements. You have a checklist you have to go through, and you have to document it all, and you have to write it up. And then once you've completed all that, it's reviewed, and you'll either be approved, or they'll say, you're not quite there yet. We want you to do a little more. And luckily I was approved. I got through it. And so, and really depending on how diligent you are, it takes about 1 to 2 years. And I got done almost about a year. It took me a year to get my certification. I was extremely diligent. It was really important to me to get it done, and get it done. I don't want to say quickly, but diligently. So, I really sought out assignments to fulfill the requirements.
So let's get right to this regarding a profiler. You get an unsolved murder, like you said, violence, crime against adults, like you talked, like you were working in. What is your role as a profiler compared to all, of course, all the other moving parts, other people working on it as well? What is your role in an unsolved murder as a profiler?
It depends on what the agency is asking for. But usually they're looking for a profile of an unknown offender. What are the personality traits and characteristics of the person who committed this crime? So, and that's my job. And not only that, it's not only just coming up with a profile, but suggestions, not interview suggestions, but investigative suggestions, things they might not have thought of, things that we've seen done in other cases that prove to be successful. So, or if there's something specific that we think needs to be done with a particular case, we'll make that suggestion. So that is my role. And the role is to consult with them, help advise them, answer questions. It's not to tell them what to do. So I take that very seriously, because we don't know everything. They're the ones that are doing these investigations. They're the ones that are talking to these people personally. They're the ones that have actually seen the original crime scene. And so, I always take that into consideration, that it's their case. So this is just information. If they find it useful, then I hope they use it. And if they don't find it useful, then they can discard it. So that's my role. And for me, bringing my background in forensic science and crime scene investigation, I always would start, and everybody has a different process, but it was always important for me to start with the crime scene, the photographs, the reports that were written about the crime scene. If you have one, sometimes you don't always have a crime scene. You don't know where it is, but in general, most of the time I had a crime scene. So that was always really important. And I also thought the autopsy reports and the autopsy photos were very important. So that's where I always started. I tried to block everything out. One of the things I tried not to do, people talk about, well, you need to see all the interviews that were done and all of that. And sometimes I found those could be, I didn't want to be misled. Not misled, but I didn't want to be biased. I wanted to try to form opinions based on the crime scene and the evidence that I saw. Another big important aspect in approaching this is victimology, and developing the understanding that the crime victim, and everything you can about them. And I did find that in many cases that was lacking, and I think it can always be better developed. And I think the reason why is because tough questions need to be asked, and sensitive questions need to be asked. We need to get these answers, and because they can tell us so much, because the more you know about your victim, the more you know about your offender. And so asking these questions can sound like you're victim blaming, or it can be hurtful to family members to ask certain questions. But that is very important. So it's a very sensitive thing. And so we have these things that we call general assessment questionnaires, and we would provide those to investigators to give to families, and to say, we're just trying to get as much information as possible. Don't hold back, even if it's negative information about the victim. Don't feel bad about that. We really need to know these things, because so many people don't want to disparage a crime victim. And I don't blame them. But it's such an important part of it. In some of the cases that I worked on, the victimology was everything. It informed my opinion to a great extent as to where their risks came from and where they didn't come from. So that's kind of the process and what we do to assist.
How long, generally, how long does it take for you to, put your report together? You're given an unsolved crime. I realize every crime is a little different, but what would you say typically? How long does it take you to put something like that together? And I think you said usually your caseload was 10 to 15 cases, but how long generally is one take to put together?
Typically somewhere between 2 to 4 months.
Wow.
So it's not a quick process. And I guess if I started on a Monday and I didn't work on anything else, and I could maybe get a case done by Friday. But a lot of it is coordinating, it's setting up the consultation, it's talking with investigators, it's reviewing all of the materials. and thinking, and not only that, but thinking about it. I don't like to jump to conclusions. I always tell people I'm very slow. So I am very slow. I realize that it's easy to jump to conclusions. I really try to think things through carefully. And so, but just from maybe start to finish, something could take about 4 months. Just, okay, here's the request that has come in. You talk with law enforcement, you tell them the materials that you need. Sometimes you're asking them, okay, can you please, like the general assessment questionnaires, we'd like these filled out about the victim. So please go back and hand these out to people that knew the victim and ask them to, and so that may take time to get those back. And so sometimes it's just a back and forth a little bit. And, and then like a completely cold case where there's just very little investigation that can be done at that point in time, something like that might not take as long. And then others, because if you have a serial case, that could take months and months and months. So those can take a long time as well, because you're not only you're looking at, you have to look at each of the cases individually, because one of the things we're always doing, I mean, somebody can say, oh, we have a serial killer, and because we have 8, let's say, I'm just making, 8 people dead in our area, we think it's a serial killer. Well, one of the things we do is we have to look at each case individually to see, do we think they're linked?
Yeah.
Now, they may be linked already through forensic evidence. That makes it easy for us, but we're also looking at the behavior. And if you don't have forensic evidence, particularly in old cases, you're looking at the behavior, and can you link the behavior together?
Right.
So that's another thing we're looking at, is not only is it, what are the characteristics of the offender, but are these even linked?
I don't have this in the outline, but as we're talking, something's coming to mind. What is the history of profiling? When did this really become a thing, like in law enforcement? Maybe it didn't even start here in the United States. Maybe it started somewhere else. What is the kind of the background of this? And, how did this become a thing over the years?
I think just from some of the courses that I took at the time, I think that early on there was some Matt Bomber or something, and a psychologist did a profile. This is bad. I can't remember how long ago, but it's years and years and years ago. And a psychologist or a psychiatrist or something came up with a profile that he'll be a good dresser, and he'll be stylish, and came up with these characters. I think that was, kind of an early form. And I think profiling has been around. We just didn't really know what it was. I mean, anytime you're thinking about, well, what kind of person could do this, and you're trying to assess somebody's characteristics, you're profiling. Or how am I going to approach this person or this situation? So I think it's been around in some capacity for, years and years and years, long before we had a name for it. But I think, and depending on who you talk to, some people say I came up with the term profiling. No, I did. So there's some debate, but I mean, I think as we know it today, it really got started in the 70s with FBI agents who were going out and interviewing offenders and trying to come up with, characteristics of certain types of offenders and their backgrounds and things like that, and applying that to unsolved crimes. And that was the early work of the FBI's, I think at the time, behavioral science unit, they were calling it. It's gone through various names. But I think the modern behavioral analysis, I think probably started in the 70s with the FBI, as we've all come to know it today.
Okay. Is there, once again, when I, once again, as a layperson, I think about, this sounds a lot like psychology. And are there competing schools of profiling, or is there just one accepted way to do this? Or is it more like when we think about psychology, there's like the Jungian way and then Freud, and is it like that, or is it something different? Or is there just this accepted thing that's accepted throughout, not just the United States, as the world, is how you're supposed to view all of this?
I don't think there's an accepted way. Okay. It is,
Okay.
I think every person in this field will approach it differently, and they'll see things differently. This is not an exact science. There's not a lot of research or empirical data to support this. And having a scientific, a hard science background, I realize that. And so that's, I think, some of the criticism is that there isn't a method or a standard procedure for profiling or accepted way to do it. There just isn't. There's not that I'm aware of that it's ever come up. I know how we approach the cases, and even amongst the people that I worked with, we all had different ways to approach things. We had different ways to look at it. We brought different, background and training and experience to it. It is somewhat of an art form, and that's why it's criticized, and I completely understand why it's criticized. Absolutely. There's not a lot, and there have been some studies that suggest, well, it's profilers are no better than just a common person, but that isn't true. Actually, it's studies that have shown that the profilers tend to be a little bit better.
Okay. All right. Well, it's funny that we're doing this interview, and maybe is because I will admit that given the work that I do, that I have been critical of profiling and things in the past. But recently, when I revealed that, I'm going to, be doing an interview with you, although I haven't used your name yet, I've just said I'm going to be talking to an FBI agent. I made the statement, well, it took Nixon to go to China. So, that's, so that's kind of how I want to talk to somebody who does this stuff to understand it, because it is accepted and everything. And I, of course, have been very dubious of it. So I want to talk to somebody and be able to ask them questions about it. It's why I think I'm enjoying this interview so much. Let's move on to this. In your work, have you ever gone and spoken to murderers? Is that part of requirement, or do you think it's a good idea where you're looking at something and then you think, well, maybe this, because I've seen many serial killers interviewed in jail. Is part of your work something that you think's good to do, or what?
So yes and no.
Okay.
So
I love those kind of answers.
I know. I wish I could give a more direct answer.
Okay.
So I think it's been my observation that many serial offenders, whether they're serial killers or serial rapists, don't have a lot of insight into their own behavior. You can ask them a lot of questions, they don't tell the truth all the time. Just like anybody, they're not going to tell you their deepest, darkest secrets. So, and they all are very different. You can't just say this serial killer is like this, so therefore they're all like that. And one of my colleagues, I love to use his phrase, if you've seen one serial killer, you've seen one serial killer. Now they may have certain traits in common, but they're very different. So, take, for example, the Golden State Killer, who was identified as Joe D'Angelo. Now, I heard people interviewed, but prior to him getting caught and prior to him being prior to him being identified, I saw a TV show about him, and somebody was saying, well, when they catch him, he'll talk because they all like to talk. And having worked on that case, I'm like, he's not going to talk. He's not like another offender who does like to talk or relive things. This is not who he is as an offender based on what I'd seen when he'd committed his crimes. And so, but yeah, I feel that they just don't have a lot of insight, or they're unwilling to share their insight in it. And we don't get involved. That's also a myth. We don't get involved in doing interviews of the killers. And people will criticize, well, you never met them, so how do you know? Well, we're looking at their crimes, right? Yeah. And many times we don't meet them because they're not even identified. And it isn't until perhaps, like, if you're involved in the investigation, you may be interviewing somebody directly. But as a profiler, you are not. That's a big myth. And the other thing is, you don't really start interviewing unless you're doing research. And that's a different unit at BAU. And if you're doing research on, you may go out and interview somebody that has committed a certain type of crime. And, so that's at the point you would get involved in, conducting interviews of people. And of course, once you start doing research, especially on human subjects, there's a whole lot of red tape to go through. So to back to your question, do I think it's helpful? I think it can be helpful, but I also think you have to take it with a grain of salt, anything that they tell you. You have to be very careful. They're murderers.
Right.
They often, they lie. You have to,
Yeah. They're predators, and predators have to be very cagey and lying and
yeah,
deceitful and be very deceptive to get what they want.
right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. You can still learn from that too. It's not that you
Mm-hmm.
can't learn from somebody that's lying to you,
Yeah.
but do I feel like, do I feel like if I go interview a serial killer, it's going to help me with another case like in the movies? Probably not. Maybe.
Yeah, because once again, in fact, it's already been brought up in this interview, The Silence of the Lambs, because I think a lot of people of a certain age, I'm a Gen Xer, we think about, and in fact, maybe you should know this, Julia, my mother is actually an extra in Silence of the Lambs, the movie. She was in the funeral homes. Part of it was filmed very close to where I grew up in Pennsylvania.
Well, one of my
Anyway,
good friends was in the academy at the time,
oh,
and she's
really?
an extra. Yeah,
Oh,
and
is
she
that
was.
right? Is that right? We were just like Kevin, the six
I
degrees of,
know. Yeah.
Kevin Bacon. We've been just a
Yeah.
couple people separated from each
Yes,
other.
I
That's
know.
very interesting. Yeah, my mother is in the funeral home scene. In fact, a couple people I know are in that scene, but my mother, who's deceased now, she was in the funeral home scene when they come in and they find the moth inside the
Yeah.
victim's throat.
Oh,
Yeah, in
yeah.
that scene, my mother is an extra in that scene. Anyway,
Yeah.
getting
That's
back to
great.
Silence of the Lambs, because of course I think people of a certain age think about that movie and they think of Clarice Starling going to talk to Hannibal Lecter because the FBI needs help trying to figure out, Buffalo Bill. You're saying that, of course, it's Hollywood, but just in general, if you're really working, maybe thinking about that, not maybe as constructive as maybe people may think.
I'm not aware, and I could be wrong, I'm not aware of any case where that was being investigated and we went and interviewed another serial killer about it. And I'm not saying that didn't happen. I never did anything like that. No, and when I was in the unit, people didn't do that. Now, do we look at the research and what we've learned about past serial killers? But it's not only just interviewing them, but it's also comparing that to their crimes as well, and drawing from that. Now that is helpful. So I don't want to say it's just not completely unhelpful, but I think you have to be careful. You have to take it all. You have to be very cautious with what they're telling you, but to actively talk to somebody to try to solve a case, that's just kind of Hollywood. But certainly the research and the early research that was done is what's built on. It's all we've drawn from that. But and what we're finding too is even some of the serial killers that we thought had told the truth at some point, it turns out they didn't, or they held back. And you always have to keep in mind that you're likely not getting the entire story, the full truth. And I mean, I would say that probably 99% of the time you're not.
Okay. Do you, while we're on this topic, before we move on to some new items, are you aware there is a doctor of psychology doing a tour in the United States talking about the psychology of serial killers? Are you aware of this?
No.
Yeah, I went and saw it. It was right. It's like a touring show. She was here in Clearwater. When was that? April or May? And being that I'm going to look up her name very quickly, see if the name is familiar to you at all. I meant to put it in my notes and forgot to do so. Let me, because I went to see it with a friend of mine, Dr. Rachel Tolles. Have you ever heard of her?
I have not.
All right. Yeah. The Psychology of Serial Killers. I'm just reading from what it said when she was here in Clearwater. The Psychology of Serial Killers and Why They Captivate Us, hosted by renowned clinical psychologist and criminal expert Dr. Rachel Tolles. So you've never heard of her or it?
No, but that doesn't mean she's
Okay.
not an expert in her field. I don't want to.
Okay. All right.
I don't want to just because I don't know her.
Okay.
So she probably doesn't know me either.
Okay. All right.
So yeah,
Okay.
no, I hadn't heard of her, but there are, I mean, there are a lot of experts on serial killers, and they're experts in ways that I'm not, and they have insight that I don't have. I mean, my experience is, looking at the scenes themselves, the crimes themselves, and drawing from that as opposed to drawing from the serial killers directly. So,
All right.
I mean,
So
most of the cases,
most
most of the cases, we don't know who the offender is.
Yeah.
And so we're drawing from the crimes they committed and the way they committed and the victims that they chose. And that's more our approach.
Okay. All right. And so you can check that out if you want to check that out after we're done here. Dr. Rachel Tolles, and I think she's still doing this tour. It was a fine presentation. I'll just, maybe if you look it up, maybe we can have an off camera, not recorded conversation about it maybe sometime down the road. If you want to check it out, there you go.
Sure.
Let's move on to this. I have to ask you about this 9/11. Of course, the FBI very involved in the investigation of 9/11. What do you remember about it? Where were you? And in your position, your experience and everything, did it play a role in the aftermath of that? Or was it a lot of the FBI? We just got to keep doing what we're doing, and then the part of the FBI is going to work on that. How does that all work?
So I can tell you that at the time, I mean, so I was in the FBI 9/11. I'd been an agent for about 2 years, and we dropped everything. Wow. Everybody was working that case in some capacity, at least from my perspective, because I was in Boston, and we did have hijackers go out of Boston. So that, we were a hub of investigative work there. But at the time, 9/11, where I had actually gone to the West Coast. I was in Seattle for a family gathering on 9/11. And I remember waking up, and I was at my aunt and uncle's house. I hear my uncle say, planes just flew into the World Trade Center building. And I heard it from, like, I was up in the attic bedroom. I heard him from downstairs. I woke up, I went right downstairs, and we were watching the TV. The second one hits, and I called my supervisor, and she was acting supervisor. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? You want me to go to the Seattle field office? She's like, no, just stay put, go to your family's gathering. There's nothing you can do. And so I sat there for a couple hours. I'm like, no, I need to go. So obviously the planes were grounded. So I went and I rented a car, I rented a Ford Focus, and I drove back to Boston.
Wow.
3.5 days.
Wow.
I would sleep for maybe 2 or 3 hours, get back on the road. And it was interesting because, when you're involved in that kind of investigation, you're not really watching the news. You're just, I mean, at least in Boston, people are running from one search warrant to another, airports, dumpsters, hotel rooms, vehicles getting towed, searching vehicles. I mean, it was constant. So people were calling me, like, if they had a time to sit for a couple minutes, they'd call and they'd ask, well, what's the news reporting? Because I was listening to, like, public radio the whole way across the country. So I was keeping everybody kind of informed. So once I got back to Boston, I got back at 3 a.m. and at 6 a.m. I got a phone call, and, like, we need somebody to drive to Washington, D.C. now.
Wow.
Yeah. So what they wanted is armed agents to take evidence to the FBI laboratory, and they didn't want, they just wanted to make sure it was escorted down. They didn't want to mail anything. They didn't want to put it on a plane or anything. So basically they just thought, well, you've been driving so much, you might as well drive a little more. So I went straight to work. We loaded up vans and drove down to DC overnight, and then took the evidence to the lab, drove back, and then from then on, it was, I was a member of the evidence response team. So most of what I was doing was searches, search warrants, and going from one search to another. And we were on for 7 days a week for a few months, and then we finally went to 6 days a week, and it was 12-hour shifts, and that went on for a long time.
Wow.
So
in your area was in Boston or in Boston?
Yeah, in Boston. And we, so being a member of the team, we would also, the evidence response team is out of Boston. You have some members in the resident agencies, but so, a lot of my teammates went up to Portland because some of the hijackers flew out of Portland, and they searched the airport there. They searched got their cars that they had rented. They searched their hotel rooms. And so that was just ongoing for quite a while. And then after things had slowed down, there's, obviously the FBI is asking for any information from the public.
Yeah.
So we started, doing searches, and it was a crazy time. And, so it didn't take a lot to get a search warrant. Oh, my neighbor's suspicious. So, so we were doing a lot of things that were really unrelated. I remember at one point, some child had said to their teacher, "My dad flies airplanes into buildings." And that prompted a search of that home. And it turned out it was just a kid making a silly statement, but that's kind of what the atmosphere was like at the time, just running from search warrant, sometimes related and other times not. If people were behaving suspiciously, obviously, there would be interviews done and things like that. So it was, it was a very unique time, to say the least.
Yeah. I can only imagine you being in Seattle and making that decision. I've driven across the United States a few times. That's a long way. That's a long way. And so you have all those 3 days. That once you get back in, you're hearing all this on the radio. You're in the FBI. That once you get back there, it's going to be a crap show, for a long time. And I just imagine those 3 days in that car. Monumental for all of us anyway, but for you, being that you were, you were actually going to be, physically, mentally involved in finding out what happened. It's quite a weight.
Yeah. I had a lot of anxiety. I wanted to just get back and be with my teammates and my coworkers. I felt you have a weird feeling as an FBI agent. I'm missing out. I need to be a part of this. I need to be helping. You feel like you're not helping, I think, is what I was feeling at the time. I just wanted to get there. And, my supervisor at the time, she obviously experienced and just like, don't panic. You just stay there. You'll get back when you get back. And that didn't feel right to me. I couldn't do that. So I did not tell her that I was leaving. I just left. And then I called her, left a voicemail for her on her work phone in the middle of the night. So I'm telling her, but I'm
crafty.
not, yeah, it was definitely by design. And I told her, I'm in Bozeman, Montana now. So I'm on my way. And I got a phone call at some point on the road. What the hell? And I'm like, I just can't sit still, please. Yeah. I can't, this is something that's never happened, and I can't sit still. I mean, it either that or I was going to go report to the Seattle FBI office, but I also felt like I wanted to be with my teammates.
Yeah.
They were working hard. I wanted to be there. I wanted to support them. I wanted to be part of it. And looking back, what a crazy decision. I mean, and you're right. I just went right back into it. It was just I don't want to say a mess, but it was nothing I ever experienced in my life or ever again in the FBI. Not like
Yeah,
that.
right. I mean, obviously, with of course the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993, FBI was involved in that,
Yes.
of course. But yeah, this is totally something different. There's no, there's no checklist. I guess when you have buildings, planes flying into buildings and everything, even for the FBI, there's no checklist on how to go about doing all of this because nobody expects it.
Yeah. And I think the one thing, I don't want to say the one thing, but I do think the FBI does respond very well and better than almost anybody in the world to these mass catastrophes and these mass crime scenes. That's what we do.
Mhm.
And so yes, you're experiencing something that has never happened before, and you're figuring out ways as you go along.
Yeah.
But I think the FBI is very good at that. And I mean, I know the FBI has faults, but I also can see when we do a really good job. And I was very proud of the work that we did during that time and the way the case was, solved. It was
If I
incredible
can,
work.
yeah, if I can ask, once again, I don't know how much of this is still, off the record or secret or whatever all these years later, but being that you were in Boston, as an example, I guess the terrorists did, some of them did stay in Boston. Did you ever like go to where they lived or the hotel rooms, or was that part, if you can talk about that? Did you
Yeah.
get
So
that close?
I
Did you get that close to the
I
investigation
did
or?
not. I did help search one of the vehicles that they rented, but
Wow.
I did not go to the hotel because I was still on the road. But
Okay.
early on that there had been something that happened in the parking lot. I believe it was at Logan Airport where two cars, I don't know, there was an exchange between some people, and it turned out that one of the when the um when the attack happened, somebody called in. I don't know if they called the FBI or the state police, but they said, hey, this morning I was parking at Logan Airport and I had this run in with somebody in the parking lot and I just thought I would report it. So then they went and they found the car, and the car came back to one of the terrorists, and that's kind of how they started to become identified. That was a huge lead, a huge tip. And so that was pretty early on. So early on, we were starting, to identify. And when I say we, it wasn't me personally. It
Okay.
was just, the people in my office and the experts that actually work these. Because I remember I'm working bank fraud. So,
Hmm.
and
Right.
so they were putting together these connections of people, and they knew like, okay, we know this name and that's connected to this guy now, and then they would start trying to identify where they'd been and who they'd been in contact with. And it just kind of started to come together where you had, this group of people, and some of them had come into Boston, stayed in Boston, flown out of Boston. Some of them have gone into Portland, Maine, and flew out of Portland. And, but that was kind of how it all started to unfold. And of course, I wasn't part of that part. I was, I don't want to say just, but I was doing the searches
Okay.
and
One more
gathering
thing on
information.
9/11, and then we're going to get into some of your cases that you've actually worked on. Now that you have all this experience as a profiler, I think you said you were working for the FBI for 2 years when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when you think of 9/11 from a profiling, from an investigation, of course, this crime against the United States, this act and everything, do you see it more as a plan that was very well thought out, or did these guys just get lucky in being able to pull this off? And how does a profiler think about all of that with all of your investigation experience?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it was well planned out. Obviously, it wasn't 100% successful, but it was pretty successful
Yeah,
I would think in their minds.
yeah.
And they were able to exploit some of the security that, or lack of security, and they knew the system. And so, but I mean, looking back, I think it was well planned out. Also looking back, not that I did this, but I do think there were the warning signs. And I think an agent in Arizona at some point was noticing, hey, these guys are taking flight lessons, yeah. And there was a memo that went out. And so, looking back, there may be some warning signs. It doesn't mean, we should have all jumped to the conclusion that they were going to fly these airplanes into buildings and, into, the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, or the White House, but was it well planned? Yeah, I think it was well planned, and they were planning it for quite a while.
Yeah.
So, but I think they were able to exploit the lack of security that we had at the time as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. Let's move on to this. Some of your cases, maybe we'll just start here. Do you remember your first assignment? Once you became a profiler, you went through all this, you got credited and everything else. What can you tell the listeners about your first profile case? I think although I know you've covered many, even I remember the first disappearance I featured on Unfound. I'm going to guess it's maybe the same for you, your first profiling project.
Sure. So the first case, and I actually was not certified. I had just finished my 16 weeks of the classroom work. And so once you finish your classroom work, you can be assigned cases. So I wasn't certified yet, but my first case was the murder of Philip DiMartino in San Francisco. And he was a gay man who was found murdered in his apartment. He'd been stabbed several times, like 47 times. And that was my first assignment. I had just finished class that day, and I was in my office packing up, ready to go home. And my boss comes in. He said, "We have this case coming in from San Francisco." And it was the very early stages. And one of the things I think that they were wanting was this some sort of serial offender who was attacking gay men? Because prior to Philip, there had been another attack on another gay man. I'm not sure how long prior, but actually never looked at that case. So I can't tell you if they're connected or not. I don't think they had a serial killer, but that was one of the things they were, worrying about. Do we have a serial killer here? So I looked at that case. That was my very first case. And I think the case that I was assigned, once I was a certified profiler, the first case I was assigned was the what's known as the Golden State Killer case. But at the time,
wow, I lucky you, or maybe unlucky you, depending on how you look at it. Wow.
It's lucky is a weird word to use, right? And enjoyment is a weird thing to use when you're talking about these types of cases. But I guess the best way to say it, when I joined the FBI, these are the types of cases that I hope to work on and be a part of, and be part of the solution in some way. And so I felt this is what I joined to do, so I'm going to do it. So that was the first case that I was assigned. My first, big case was
all right,
that.
And we're going to get to that. Let's go back to the other one. We don't want to slough over Mr. Martino. What year did this happen? And if you can say what were some of your conclusions as
so Philip, he was found in his apartment in August of 2010, and he hadn't shown up for work, and he was very diligent at work. He worked for a property management company. And so it was right away, they knew something was wrong. His coworkers went and found him. They saw him through the window, called police. But what had happened, he had been out the previous Friday night, and he'd been to some clubs, and he was a gay man. So he had been into some clubs in the Castro district, and, came home at about, I think 9, I may be off on the time, but about 9 p.m., a neighbor heard what they thought was screaming. Didn't really think much of it. I mean, this is a busy area. And so that's probably about the time that he was murdered, we suspect. And, just based on some of the things. There were some writings, which I can't go into, but some writings that were left at the crime scene. The offender definitely hurt himself. He cut himself. And so there is offender DNA. But, based on Philip's victimology and the notes, and I thought that this was probably somebody who was maybe a native Spanish speaker. And so, in terms of who Philip liked to date, he liked to date Hispanic men and darker men. So that obviously that's part of victimology, knowing that, okay. Yeah. And then the notes, notes that were left at the crime scene were written in Spanish. So there's a clue. So I can't say 100%. This is where, profiling is, more art than science, I guess, but you can't say 100% that this was somebody whose native language was Spanish, but likely because that's the type of person he dated and preferred to date. And the notes are in Spanish. And, I do believe it was somebody, Philip was not dating anyone exclusively. And he made that very well known that he didn't want to be dating exclusively. He was, he was dating lots of different people, I would say. When I say date, he would be hooking up with people.
Okay.
And so, but because of the passion, and I won't say passion, because of the emotion, I felt that he might have had prior contact with this person before. So those were some of the findings in the, and one of the suggestions we told the police department was to let the public know that, this is somebody who likely injured themselves and they may have cuts on their hands. Like maybe somebody came to work or missed work or had bandages. And if you have these other characteristics in line, and that didn't lead to anything. It remains unsolved.
Wow.
Today. Yeah. And the case, because it was my first case, it has really stuck with me. We covered it on my own podcast.
Yep. And it's all ringing. It's all ringing true. Yes, I think. And I know I've listened to it because a lot of this is ringing true to me. Yes.
Yeah. It sticks with me. And, I think that in any case that I work on, you find a way, you relate in some way. And I am a big sister. I have a brother, and Philip had an older sister. And so I feel that, like this is important for the family because, somebody, that his older sister loved him, missed him. And so I think about that and I know it can be solved. There's DNA there. I think there are probably some challenges with tracing the DNA and at this point, but I do believe it will be solved because of that, because of the DNA. And I look forward to that for Philip's family, and certainly it'll just bring me some, I don't know, just to know that the first case I worked on gets solved. That'll just be a good feeling because I can't get past it. It means a lot to me, that particular.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
They all do. They all mean a lot. You become very invested in the victims and who they were.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, you do know. But when it's your very first case and it's unsolved and you know that it's possible and I don't say it's not for lack of trying, the investigative work is done. It's being done. It just hasn't gotten the answer yet. But it's going to happen. And I really look forward to that day when I read somewhere or hear from somebody that they've caught the person.
You'll have to remind me, was this a situation where did it look like somebody broke in to kill him, or did it look like he had somebody over there and they got into an argument and something, or what?
Yeah, I believe that it was somebody he had invited there and it was a romantic encounter. And so, and what transpired was something that was of high emotion. So there could, didn't appear that there was a fight necessarily. I mean, there were some defensive wounds, but this really, I think this offender just went from, 0 to 100, like right away. Something just triggered that offender and they attacked Philip with a lot of emotion. And I'm not quite sure what that is, but it probably, or likely could be based on romantic feelings or rejection or something along those lines. But there wasn't any signs of theft. There wasn't any signs of anyone who broke in. So, it really leads me to some, sort of something personal between Philip and the offender.
Okay. And if everybody wants to really get the down deep everything from Julie on it, you can go to, of course, her podcast, The Consult, where I know you get into a lot of the details on that investigation and everything. So that was the first one, I guess, technically before you were certified that you were responsible for. And once again, you can go check that out on her podcast. We're going to talk about the podcast here eventually. Let's now go back to the Golden State Killer, otherwise known as the original Night Stalker. Of course, we're not going to cover everything involved in that, but you get that case, and I guess for a profiler, of course, we got into your background, how you all got into this. This is like hitting the jackpot, I guess. Your emotions when you see that file end up on your desk, and where do you get into it, given that I guess at that point, the murders were like 30 years old or something like that. How do you go about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, you talk about when the file landed on my desk, and I was very well aware of this case. I had seen a documentary in 2004. It was on A&E, and I had not heard of the case before.
Wow.
I know.
Wow.
And
wow. Okay.
But part of the reason was that this offender really flew under the radar in some ways, because the sexual assaults that he committed early in the series were not tied to the murders until 2001, when DNA was done, and then they were able to connect crimes that they never knew were connected. And so that was in 2001. And so I think that's why he I don't say he flew under the radar. I mean, he was known by some other names, but so then in 2004, I see the documentary, and there was a detective, one of the lead detectives on the case, Larry Poole, was interviewed. And so he really stuck with me in the story that he told about this case, and you could see how dedicated he was to it. And so I always knew about the case. I followed it, any updates, and there were not a lot of updates over the years. And then when my boss had called, when I was at the BAU, my boss called me into his office, and he says, "Have you ever heard of the East Area Rapist?" And I don't even think he finished his sentence. And I said, "Yeah, East Area Rapist, I've heard of it." And I said, and I knew he was asking me because he was going to assign it to me. And I said, "I'll take it."
Wow.
And so I get the assignment. And what I did, Ed, is I really just started from the very first offense and just read every single incident report. And it took me about 6 months to get through everything. But, and once I started, I got through maybe like the first, 15 or more. I'm trying to think, because there were, there are, let's see, 45. I think I looked at 45 sexual assaults.
Yeah, at least that.
And 12 homicides. And I think I only actually had 45 that I looked at. Now there's some others I think that are out there that I didn't even look at, or they were not at the time attributed to him. So, but I started noticing some patterns, and I'm like, wait a second. He does not sexually assault anyone prior to ransacking the home. He comes in, ties them up, ransacks, then there's a sexual assault. And I thought, is that what I'm noticing? So I started all over again to see in every single case. And so that's what I noticed. So I thought, like, what's really important is that this is a person who likes to go through people's homes, their belongings. And I think what struck me about that is that one of the biggest questions that investigators had, and it was very divisive, is whether the East Area Rapists, so these are the sexual assaults that are occurring in Sacramento starting like in 1974, were they the same offender as the Visalia ransacker? And right. So in Visalia, which is about 4 hours from Sacramento, there had been a series of ransackings where somebody was going in and just ransacking the homes. People were not home. There was an attempted abduction of a high school girl. And when her father tried to intervene, the ransacker killed him. And he was a murderer. He wasn't just a ransacker. And detectives at the time in Visalia thought that the ransacker could be the East Area rapist. And the timing was interesting. It was like 72 to 74 were the ransackings, and 76 the sexual assaults begin. And so the timing was interesting. But the one big thing is that the descriptions were very different.
Yeah, all over the place. Yes.
They were all over the place.
All over the place.
So but that was one of the questions, you approach these things and you're like, okay, what questions need to be answered? And I felt like I really needed to answer, do I think that these are one of the same offender? Because that could open you up to a whole bunch of new leads if you can say the Visalia ransacker is the East Area rapist as well. And just based on this, the intensity of the ransacking, and this is really important. He said, this was a sexually gratifying thing to be a ransacker. And so, and there were some other things and details in the reports and stuff that led me to believe that this is likely the same offender. And I will tell you that, some people agreed and some people strongly disagreed with that, but that was my assessment. And then of course, looking at the homicides, most of them, I think, were connected with DNA, not all of them. But again, he had a very specific way he did things. And so he was really easy, in the cases where we didn't have DNA, it was very easy to link them all together because it was very specific.
Yeah, the modus operandi very within a couple percentages of each other from one to the next.
He just didn't change. I mean, you could just start reading a report and you'd be like, this is him. This is him.
Right.
And I think too, which there was one report I read that I think was a false report. And which, it doesn't matter. It's here nor there. But because in the media, they didn't really release the exact details and exactly how he did things. And that wasn't really a priority, like really looking at, okay, step by step, how is he doing things? And so you could weed out somebody that maybe was a false report, like this is not him. Either it's a false report or this is a different offender. And there was one report, and I did believe it was false. I don't even believe it was anybody. I think I don't know why they made it up, but yeah, so it was very easy to link them together. It wasn't hard work, but I mean, it wasn't hard in terms of I was doubtful. Mm-hmm. It was just a lot of work. The reviewing of all the files and everything. And then also just trying to come up with, well, what do we think this person is like? What's his personality like?
So when you profiled him, and then of course they finally caught him, of course, due to DNA, how do you look back at the profile that you put together on it, and then who ended up being? And I have to ask, did you get a lot of things right? Did you get a lot of things wrong? How did it all come out?
Yeah, I got a lot of things right. And I know that people are probably listening, like, of course she's going to say that, but you can ask the investigators.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I did do an interview with Larry Poole on a TV show, and he did validate that I got things right. Of course, he's going to say, he's sitting right next to me. Right. But, what I will tell you, what I think I got wrong is, because, and this is where you go back and, this is where profiling is limited. You don't always have all the information. And so there's always these caveats, if there's more information that develops, this could change the profile. And so when I was looking at it, I thought the ransackings in Visalia were where he began his crimes. And it turned, well, we'll get to that. So I thought he was younger than he turned out to be. Okay. And because I thought he was younger, I didn't think, so one of the things a lot of people thought is because he referenced the military and he was very tactical. A lot of people thought, and that they thought because he was moving around California, he was moving because he was being transferred from military base.
Yep.
And that was a big focus. And I'm like, I don't think he's in the military because he would not, like, he does everything he can to try to disguise himself. He wears a mask. He blinds people with a flashlight. He disguises his voice. And nobody's ever really gotten a good look at him except maybe a couple people in Visalia. But I don't think he's going to give out information that would actually lead to his identification. And he did tell a couple people, referenced he was in the military and this and that. So I said, I don't think he's in the military. And I thought he was, I mean, although this wasn't in my report, in my own mind, I thought he was too young to have ever even been in the military.
Okay.
But I thought he would have a fascination with it, that he would dress like that. Like he would look like he was a military person. And so it did turn out that while he was not in the military at the time of the offenses, that he had been in the military at one point in time. And so I think that's where I got wrong, and was just thinking that he was younger. And come to find out, there was another series of burglaries and ransackings back up in Sacramento that had occurred prior to Visalia. And I didn't know about those until long after the fact. And, looking at those now and what I've been told, and I think investigators believe this as well, that he's responsible for those. So that would have, made him a little bit older in my mind. Like, okay, he started even younger. Yeah. Right. So I that's where you can kind of be off. So that was I think the place where I was wrong. And yeah, the other thing I thought was that he had formal training in firearms. He was very efficient. He was very effective. He escalated directly to deadly force whenever confronted. So, and using a gun, a firearm, the Visalia ransacker stole weapons, firearms, and used them in other crimes. And so I felt like he likely had some formal training. And just based on the way he approached his victims, shining his flashlight, tying them up, I thought he probably had law enforcement experience.
You're right about that.
Yeah.
That ended up being correct.
Yeah. And a lot of the investigators thought so too. They saw, I mean, they're tactically trained. They know that. But I did agree with that he probably had law enforcement experience. Now, this is where supervisors step in. They thought that was too specific, and that was not in my report, but that was definitely something that was expressed to law enforcement. And what was in my report was he had formal firearms training. So like, what else does that mean?
Okay.
I said, you gotta let me leave this in. So that was another area. And I think the biggest thing, which is more of an intangible thing, is that, my perspective of him was that he was a very insecure person. Yeah. And that his crimes were the ultimate overcompensation for his insecurity and his, even his career in law enforcement. I need to prove myself. And it was coming from an area of insecurity and the way he committed his crimes. And he did offend against, men and women in terms of, holding them hostage and breaking into homes when there was a male and female couple. And I think some people will view that, oh, he's very brazen if he's going to, break in when a man's there. Well, I think, I thought he chose his victims specifically because there was a man there, and he could, dominate that man. He could take over his home. He could even have sexual access to his female companion, and it was his way to overcompensate for all his insecurities. And then ultimately, his girlfriend, or an old girlfriend, was interviewed, and she talked about him being very insecure. And that's what I thought. And I also thought that he was unlikely to talk if ever arrested. I didn't think he would, and he still hasn't. I mean, it doesn't mean he won't someday. He didn't when he was arrested. And
right.
And I think that's, people think, oh, they want to talk, they want to brag about it. But I don't think he was somebody that, was somebody who wanted to brag about his crimes. Not that it's hard to say, did he feel bad about him? I think what he didn't feel good is I don't think he felt good about himself. And, I think that's what prevents him from probably talking about his crimes and stuff. So,
all right, we could go on this forever. I just have a couple pointed questions, and we'll move on to the next one. What the way you look at those 5 years between 1981, his last at least documented murder, and then the murder of that young girl in 1986? How do you explain that? And why do you think he ended up murdering that girl in 86?
So I think, again, it's sometimes a misconception that serial killers don't stop. They can't stop. That's not true. We've seen that they can. In the old days with like, they never stop. There's a compulsion. And, that's about the time he started having children. And I think life got busy. Without him telling us, we don't know for sure. He was getting older, and it's not as easy. And, what he was doing, I mean, part of his need and what was gratifying to him was the prowling and the ransacking and, going in and looking in homes and peeping. And that took a lot of time and a lot of effort. And as you start having children and he still had to work and stuff like that, that it just, maybe life got too busy for him. And I also think it's about the time where starting to hear about DNA early on, particularly when he committed his crime in 1986. Now, why he did that, I don't know. Without knowing for sure, was there a time where he was able to get away from his family and he saw an opportunity and took it? But I think probably there's always going to be some prowling and peeping and maybe even breaking into people's homes that he did that we're just not aware of. And I think he saw that opportunity and took it. But, that 1986 one, the last one that we know for sure. And is it possible there are others out there? It's always possible. I'm not aware of any of them. They are very specific. They are, it's as we talked about, very specific MO that he had. And, and it could just be, he was not a dumb man. So he's probably realizing, DNA is now coming in to the picture, and he's getting older.
So, what I'm hearing here is it's kind of like being an athlete. This is he's a criminal athlete. He's prowling around, he's breaking into homes and everything. Well, doing that at 23 is a lot different than, doing that at 33. Even that, I'm 53, I'm going to be 54 soon. I think I'm in pretty good shape, but I'm not in the shape that I was at 33. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, breaking in and manhandling people and everything, it's starting to get a lot more difficult. And I can remember before, I'm old enough to remember before this was actually solved, and some people were thinking that, did he kill that girl in 1986 just to see if he still had it?
Maybe.
Just like an athlete coming out of retirement, to be quarterback, and I lead my team to a Super Bowl again. Is this the kind of thing? Did he want to see if he still really had what he lost some years before?
Right. That's possible. But you're right. And not only that, I mean, he had close calls. He got chased by a couple people.
Yep.
And he was able to get away. But at that age, that luck is going to run out, and he knew it. And, again, another myth, and serial killers don't want to get caught. And he definitely didn't want to get caught.
Yeah.
So,
right.
So I think, aging out of it, you do age out. Now, it doesn't mean he doesn't have his fantasies. It doesn't mean he doesn't act on certain things that he maybe feels he can. I think there had to be something to replace it. Now, sometimes memories are good enough. Sometimes they take trophies but it's quite possible. It wouldn't surprise me if he was still at least peeping and maybe even breaking and entering into homes at some point, even after 1986.
And one more question about him. Do you remember where you were when you found out that he had been caught?
Yes. I was just right at my house. I saw it on Twitter.
You found out like everybody else. That's kind of funny.
I did. I knew. I mean, I knew something was going on. And when I say, like, we do the profiles, and you will keep in touch. Like I did keep in touch with Larry Poole over the years, and so you keep in touch with things, but you're not part of the investigation. I'm not out there interviewing. I'm not out there arresting people. So it kind of leaves you behind. You're not in the thick of it anymore. I did my profile. I did my thing. Occasionally, like I said, people would run things by me, and we talk, but but I knew something was going on. People were pretty tight-lipped. There was some surveillance things going on, and so I had a feeling. And then I saw, actually it was Patton Oswalt, who was a comedian,
Right.
who's
Michelle McNamara's husband. Yes.
yes, Michelle McNamara's husband.
Yeah.
And obviously she wrote I'll Be Gone in the Dark, a book about the Golden State Killer.
Yeah.
Somehow the information got leaked to him, and I think I kind of know the channels of how it got leaked, but he had tweeted something and I knew he got caught. I mean, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I knew. And then of course that morning I called some of the investigators and talked to them, but I had a feeling it was coming up. And of course, selfishly, I'm like, well, what is he like?
Yes, that's right. Did I get it right? Yeah, did I get it right? Of course.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
That's, it's important to me. I wanted to do good work, and I want to know where I did make my mistakes. Can I improve upon what I did do? I feel really good about, because this was met with some resistance, but certainly my characterization of him being insecure was most of the people that worked on the case with me agreed, but there were a couple people that didn't, and there was some contentious debate about that. And so that to me was really important. To do I really feel that he's as I thought he would be, and described him based on how he committed his crimes, and I felt pretty good about that. And then there's just some other details that I'm like, okay, that I got that one right too. Or
I'm giving myself a W on that one.
I consider it a W, but you know what? I will tell you, there is not one profile I think you can get 100% right. I'm just trying to think. Maybe there is, maybe there is one that's 100% right. I felt really good about. But if I'm being honest with myself, I thought Joe D'Angelo would be younger, and and I didn't think he would have ever have been in the military. I was pretty sure that he was not in the military while he was committing his crimes. I just didn't think he would be giving out that detailed information. But so those were the misses there. And profiling is not 100%, and people think it. If they think it is, then it's not.
Right. And by the way, I do have Larry Poole's book. I've had it for a long time now. The one with the the black cover with the mask over the face and everything.
You might be thinking of Larry Crompton.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Right. I have that book.
Yeah, that's a good book.
I have somewhere in my condo here.
Yeah.
For sure. And I got it and read it many, well before he was ever caught. So okay.
Yeah, he wrote that a long time ago, and it's a good it's a good book going through all the different crimes and offenses. He did a good job on that. Yeah, Larry Poole was down in Orange County, and Larry's claim to fame is that he was, when you look at the old clips of OJ in the Bronco, Larry was the first law enforcement officer to spot the white Bronco when OJ was on the run, and he called it in. So if you Google the radio transmission, you can hear Larry Poole.
Wow. Wow, man, that guy's like the Forrest Gump of law enforcement or something, being there at all these important times in U.S. criminal history. Oh my goodness.
I chalk that up to being very observant and being a good detective. Sometimes you make your own luck by being good.
Yes.
So
all right, I never knew that. All right, all the listeners are going to go certainly go and check that out now. All right, very good. And all right, let's move on to this. Israel Keys. I've spoken about him quite a bit in like my live show I do on YouTube. And of course, we'll just start here. And in fact, I told you about this presentation I went to a couple months ago. She allowed questions from the audience. I actually asked her about Israel Keys, and she took my question. And so I'm going to give you the same question to start this off that I asked her. Is Israel Keys as prolific a killer as he has been portrayed both in true crime circles and maybe just the general media? We'll start with that.
I don't know. I think he's okay.
My,
I will tell you, I think he has been
please.
given more credit for killings he probably did not commit.
Okay.
But that does not lessen how terrifying and how horrific his crimes were. But I don't think he's responsible for as many crimes as maybe people feel that he could be. I mean, we would hear this all the time, and people calling and maybe Israel Keys did this case or this case. Now, the FBI, I think, has done a timeline trying to determine everywhere he's been over his lifetime, and are there unsolved cases in certain areas. And I think he, while maybe not being able to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, I think we could probably link him to at least a few others. But are there hundreds? No. Are there more out there we're not aware of? Yes. And certainly can't take his word for it, or things that he might have left in his cell when he killed himself. I think that is, like I said, they liked, the manipulation, the lies, duping people. They get a lot of satisfaction out of that. And so I think we have to be careful with thinking that he's the most prolific.
So this is another one that you worked on. You got the foul on this at some point before he got caught. After he killed that one girl and took her credit cards and everything. So when did you get this foul, and how long was it before they caught him? A little bit more about that.
So I was not the lead, but I worked on it. I was part of the team that worked on it. So I was the lead on the Joe D'Angelo's case. I was the lead. Okay. So, and I had help. I just want to make sure that's clear. Yeah. I don't want to take credit where. So we first got involved when Bill and Lorraine Currier went missing from their home in Essex, Vermont. Okay. And we got involved very early on. So there was a lot of forensic evidence that hadn't been developed, but they just disappeared. And it was definitely known that something bad had happened. The phone lines were cut. The window was broken. They left their medication. There was all signs that they had been kidnapped. So we got involved very early on in that, and we provided information. And I know my colleague Bob continued to assist the case. But I think one of the things right away we knew they probably had been killed. And certainly a big part of that was developing the victimology to try to determine is there some person that one of them had come into contact with that would increase their risk for this type of crime. Ultimately we found no. I mean, it really was quite a random decision by Israel Keys. So we worked on that case, and then Samantha Koenig in Anchorage, Alaska, she gets kidnapped. And we also know there's foul play involved because there's a video of somebody going to the kiosk. She worked in a coffee kiosk and kidnapping her. We were involved early on in that investigation as well. And again, it's also developing victimology and, offering suggestions. But I will tell you, we had no idea that these two cases were connected.
Wow.
It was like a jaw-dropping moment when we found out they were connected. And I think what makes it so scary and Israel Keys so scary is that it was so random, and it could just happen anywhere in these safe towns or into anyone. And there wasn't like a specific type of victim. Certainly what's driving him and his motivations are the same. But just because he chose different victims, it can throw things off, because we don't want to think they all have a type, and but it wasn't necessarily about that. It was about the control. It was about kidnapping people and controlling them, and what he did to them, and sadism is involved in both of those. But to say somebody was saying, oh, these are connected. No way. It was jaw dropping when he was arrested, and we would never have known that he was, or maybe never, there was a fingerprint that ultimately tied him to the couriers. But without his confession, it would have taken much longer time to have connected him to the couriers.
So as a profiler, then how do you look at him being able to vary, his modus operandi like that? Unlike other people who've killed multiple people, where once again the modus operandi are very similar. Like we're just talking about the original Night Stalker. As a profiler, how do you look at that? What does that say? Is that saying like the guy knows I need to vary it so he can't get caught? And then if so, why don't more killers do that?
Yeah, I think there was some consideration for him to not get caught and to, attack people. I mean, really his downfall was attacking someone close to home, close to where he lived. But I think what it comes down to is where killers are comfortable, what, their hunting grounds. Some killers, are only comfortable in a smaller area, sometimes just a city block. Sometimes we've seen apartment buildings where serial killers have struck, or and then you have ones that have, their geography is much more expansive. So I think that he was just comfortable in, committing a crime in an area he wasn't necessarily familiar with, and whereas other killers might not be. All killers, for the most part, at least planned ones, take steps to try to hide their identity or not leave forensic evidence. They all attempt to do that in some capacity. But they also have to be comfortable where they are. And, for a serial killer that, maybe is from one area of the country to fly to a different area just to commit a murder, that's going to be out of their comfort zone. Now, for Israel Keys, his comfort zone was much more expansive. And I think that's what makes it, which was really made it very difficult. Now, if these crimes, even though you had, victimologies that were very different, if these crimes had been committed in closer proximity, there might have been more of a, wait a second, we don't usually have this, but we've had the, 2 incidents, but 3 people kidnapped. We don't usually see that in this area. So if they've been closer together, there certainly would have been a look at these being connected. So,
you'll have to remind me, the couple that he killed in Vermont, was it ever established that he had scoped them out before? I mean, I've heard all this thing. Well, he went and put his tools, buried them in the woods, and then went and got them. Or how did he pick them out in the first place? What kind of surveillance did he do? Is there any proof?
He did a little surveillance. Yeah. He's, here's where, he's, he's not stupid, but he's not, an evil mastermind, as some people would think. But he knew, he could tell just based on the house that there were probably not any children living there. It was going to be a couple that were older, just based on how he looked at the house. He could tell there weren't toys in the yard and things like that. And so, yeah, there was some surveillance that was done prior, but I don't think it was a lot of thought. I don't think he put a lot of thought into it, and in any more than that, other than there's a couple that lives there. They're probably older. There's likely only 2 people in the house, and there are not any children. And those were his considerations. And the house looked like a house he could break into. So those were just some of the practical considerations he had prior to. But in terms of surveilling them long term, I don't think he knew their names.
Okay. Now you should know, being that I asked you that question at the beginning, you should know this presenter, Dr. Rachel Tolles. She said she absolutely believes that he is a prolific. In fact, I even have that. I'll send you the link to. I actually videoed her actual answer to my question, so you can hear it yourself. I'll send the link to you so you can see it yourself. She's absolutely prolific. Absolutely killed many, many people.
Yeah. So, And when he was found in his cell, this is not like something he did right away, but they found the pieces of paper, large pieces of paper, skulls that he had painted in blood on pieces of paper. And many people, including investigators in Anchorage, believe that those 11 skulls represent 11 victims. And they believe that. And that's possible. But knowing that you can't believe it, and to kill himself without providing all the answers is just his way to kind of continue to torture, and it's
Right.
sadistic in a way.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we'll ever have the answers, but yeah, I mean, many people think he's much more prolific than
sure.
what I think. Now, do I think there are more? Absolutely. I do.
Okay.
I do think there are more, and there are probably more that we just don't even know. Just people that have disappeared, we have no idea.
Wow.
But I don't think he's the most prolific ever.
Okay. I will tell you what my argument is made against the opposite side of that is that what sticks out to me is how he ended up getting caught. He was I guess we would say he got very lazy in that he killed the girl very close to his home. And then on top of that, didn't he use like her credit cards
He did.
or something?
Yeah.
And to me, that just sounds like your average run of the mill guy that knocks over a 7-Eleven. Somebody not as sophisticated as he made himself out to be. Yes, he could plan out one mysterious murder that could fool everybody, but after that, he kind of like run out of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of my thinking being. Whereas I would be thinking if he was really prolific and was thinking this all through, I just don't think that kind of guy would get caught using a dead person's credit cards. It seems like an odd choice, a bad choice.
It was a bad choice, and he didn't even realize that he could be tracked using that. And they were tracking him all the way, where he was traveling.
Yes.
And you're right, and that's good profiling on your part. It's not very smart. It's not very criminally sophisticated, and it was really just stupid. And and also I think what was interesting about him is, he didn't need to communicate with the family. He didn't need to do what he did. But I think it was just this, I'm going to push the boundaries. I'm going to torture people a little more. I think, he's an opportunist. So if he had, a chance to take something or take some money, he was going to do it. Right. But this was a way to kind of continue to prolong his gratification and his his torture of the family and prolonging his crime. And it was very, very sadistic what he did to her family, just horrific. And but yeah, it wasn't smart, and it led to him being captured.
Right.
Thank God.
So that's once again, that's just the way I look at it. That there's no proof that he was torturing any other families that had missing or murdered children or whatever, right? If there was an unsolved disappearance of John Smith out there, was that family getting calls from some guy who could have been Israel Keys?
I think what makes him so scary is this idea of these kill kits being buried. Yeah. And I think that's what people are focused on, because that's something you don't really see. You do see offenders who have rape kits and things like that keep with them, but to actually have them out places in case you're in that area and you want to commit a crime is something I've never heard of or seen before. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened. And, I think he always thought or planned and was thinking, he would want to do more than he did. But unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever know for sure how many.
Okay.
So.
All right. We're just going to go one more of your cases because it's a disappearance, and it's a disappearance I've not covered yet, but I'm very interested in it. Then
Okay.
we're going to get into your the podcast itself. We wanted to talk about that.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to Brandy Hall. Of course, this is a disappearance coincidentally here in Florida where I live, although not near to where I am here over at Clearwater Beach. This is over on the Atlantic coast of Florida. This is a disappearance that Unfound has not yet covered, although I hope to do that at some point because it is one that really does stick out because of it's very unique. How did it come onto your desk? When did it come onto your desk? And if you can say, being that this is still unsolved, looks like a murder. I realize there's only so much probably you can say, but just some of your insights on Brandy.
So I think I can't remember the exact date, but it's like 2011 or 12. It came in to our office, and I will say that the investigators had strong suspicions already and really thought they had a suspect in this, and they believed this right off the bat. It was investigated as a murder from the beginning, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. Why all disappearances should be investigated like that, right?
Yes.
It's not always possible.
Don't get me started, Julia. Don't get me started.
I mean, I understand. We'll probably get into this about resources and stuff, but they did a good job, and it was clear that something bad had happened. And so it wasn't just like, oh, she just ran off. It was like, okay, something's bad happened. So it was treated as a homicide from the beginning. And detectives, when they came to the behavioral analysis unit, were looking for observations, suggestions, ideas, profile, those types of things. And so one of the things you always have to be careful of when detectives or prosecutors have strong opinions already, you really have to put those aside. You can't just go along with what they say. You have to look at the evidence and come up with your own opinion without being influenced. So this is one of those cases where they had a very strong opinion, and I had to kind of tune everything out. I do think it's a homicide. I ended up, agreeing with them. She, Brandy Hall, 30, she was extraordinary, 32-year-old firefighter and married mother of 2. And she disappeared so by the time it came to us, it was several years old, but she disappeared I think in August of 2006.
It's been a while.
And her truck, and she had left work. She'd been working. She left work. That's on show. You can see her leaving and everything appeared normal. She was supposed to be somewhere the next day, didn't show up. And ultimately her truck was found in a pond not too far away. And there was blood inside it that I believe was hers, correct? Correct.
And enough to believe that this was something violent, probably, that she is deceased.
Yes, there was a lot of blood in her truck, so likely killed in her truck. There had been focus on a boyfriend or somebody she was seeing, and there's heavy focus on that individual, but it remains unsolved. Brandy's never been found.
Right.
And I do believe it's a homicide, and I just didn't see in her victimology she'd run up and disappear, or she just wouldn't run off like that. She wouldn't have done that. She was much more responsible than that. And plus the forensic evidence with the blood.
Yeah, the blood is hard to deny, but we should add some context to this, though. She and her husband were involved in some illegal activity, growing marijuana. He was going to jail approximately at the same time he's going to jail. She is allowing to remain free, even though it sounds like she did know something about it, right? And then what I also remember is that, like, after she went to work, she allegedly went over to, like, her supervisor's house or another firefighter's house, some guy who was already married or something.
Yeah, I don't think she went anywhere. I don't think that I don't think there's any investigation that shows she actually went over, but she was married. She was having an affair with another firefighter who is a main suspect in this investigation. He's obviously never been charged.
Right.
But yes, so her husband was facing jail time because he was growing marijuana and selling it.
Yeah.
And so that's an area we had to look at as far as her risk level, of
Yes.
course. And also anytime that you have somebody's married who's having an affair, that increases your risk as well. So you have to look at all these things. Was her husband responsible? And one of the things that I looked at was, the next day, her husband that was supposed to be sentenced, I
Yeah,
believe,
that's right.
and
Yeah.
he was looking at time. I think he knew what he was going to serve, like maybe I want to say 2 years. I could be wrong. And she was supposed to testify as a character witness. And from what I could tell about their marriage, it didn't. I mean, it seemed like they were working together to raise their children, and he may have known about the affair, but I just didn't get a sense that like this was causing a ton of issues in their relationship that we would expect. And one of the things, I mean, he was counting on her to be a good character witness, and how hard, it was going to be being a single mother, having these boys. And so, his motive, he would want her to be there to testify as a character witness. So, I didn't think he should be prioritized as the number one suspect. But I can't rule him out entirely. Right. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah,
there's a lot
going on in her life, right?
Yeah, and I would have characterized her just in terms of her victimology, or I did characterize her as medium to high risk because of all these things that were going on at the time. So
I'll ask you this, maybe. Do you think that there was correlation, causation between him going, or a coincidence, or what, or not? Between him getting caught and then going to jail at the same time that she went missing. Do you think there was some causation and correlation there, or was it a coincidence, as best as you can tell?
As best as I can tell, a coincidence, but I can't say that overall, the overall situation didn't increase everyone involved's stress level somehow. It's like, is it directly related? I didn't think so.
Okay.
And I could be wrong.
Okay. So, it's all right. I
always caveat.
I've been wrong on disappearances too.
I didn't think that it was related to that, but I do think there was a lot of stress going on in her life. And I think that elevated her risk in every event. Like stress, there's a lot of stress going on in many things. And this person that she was having an affair with, his wife was aware. I mean, they were aware. Like this was not a secret. So it wasn't like everyone just found out. So it wasn't that, but I do think tensions were increasing, and there was just so much stress in Brandy's life at that time. So you can't say it didn't have some kind of impact.
Okay.
But directly, I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay. You were, as best as I realize, this is way back in 2011 when you worked on this, as best you can remember 13 years later. And by the way, everybody, we're doing this interview on July 8th of 2024. Your opinion of the original investigation into her disappearance, was it thorough enough? Because to me, you should know, maybe you know this anyway. I mean, we rarely ever talk about forensics on Unfound. Usually there's no blood, there's no helpful fingerprints, there's nothing. If it's a disappearance within like the last 20 years, yeah, we do talk about maybe cell phone pings and cell phone information. And then if it's within the last 15 years or 12 years, we talk about Facebook and social media and everything. But we hardly ever end up with a situation where a person's missing and there's blood all over the place. Maybe I can think of one. It just coincidentally happened here in Clearwater many, many years ago that I covered. But so do you think the original investigation seems like they had a lot to work with here and everything? But your opinion on it?
Yeah, I think they did a good job. I think they did and thought of just about everything they could have. Like I said, they approached it as a homicide to begin with, so it wasn't like things slipped away that they should have gotten right at the beginning. They did a very thorough job in getting videos and phone records and messages and the forensic evidence. They processed, everything that they could. And they did a great job on victimology. And I think they did do everything possible that they could at the time. And, it was a very challenging case. There's a lot of good circumstantial evidence. And I think there's, I think that it would be, I think it could be brought as a no body homicide prosecution, but I know, for a prosecutor, they may need a little more and they don't have it, but there's some circumstantial evidence. But, as we know, prosecutors, they take the oath. They have to, feel that they can prove this beyond a reasonable doubt before they take a case. And I can see why they wouldn't feel they could prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, but there's a lot of good circumstantial evidence in that case. I think it's possible it could be prosecuted as a no body homicide, but, I'm looking from the outside, but I also see the difficulties inherent in this type of case. But it was investigated, in my opinion, very well from the very beginning. It's like there are cases that you look at and you're just like, why didn't, if you only got that, or if you only, and that doesn't do anybody any good. I mean, detectives know when they're looking at old cases, something wasn't done and there's no way of going back and obtaining it, but you see that. And in this case, it's not like that. It's not like, if only you'd done this, they did it.
Okay.
It's just the evidence isn't enough.
All right. And we should remember regarding her truck, it was not found like right that day. It was like a little while. It had to be discovered, I think, somewhere. What, right? Do you remember that? It seems to me it wasn't
discovered. I'd have to look it up. I don't, it was found. It was found. The truck was found that same month, but I don't remember how many days after she went missing that it was found.
Okay. So, in looking at that disappearance, you came to the conclusion the investigation was pretty good. You did what you could with it, and unfortunately, it's still unsolved now. We have, of course, the truck was found blood in it, and this backpack was found is not as long as I thought later, but it wasn't found right at the time. I think it was just found by accident, and we're going to get into this a little bit into the general discussion about why cases go unsolved and things here in a bit. But so we have Brandy Hall, and once again, I hope we could cover that disappearance sometime on Unfound, because I do find it fascinating because it's very unique.
Yeah.
But as far as your work goes, when these files would end up on your desk, when these local departments, state police departments would ask the FBI's help, how many of them are murders? How many of them are disappearances? What's the percentage breakdown as far as what you worked on?
Yeah, most are murders. And percentage, I don't think I have an exact percentage, but I'll tell you one thing. I have not worked as many murders as disappearances as you've covered. Not even close.
Wow. Oh,
not
wow.
even close. No.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we just didn't get involved in that many. In a lot of our disappearances too, are ones where we did suspect that a serial killer was involved. Like, look at Long Island State, or the Long Island killer.
The Rex guy, Rex, whatever his name is. Yes.
So there are missing women, and that it believed he's responsible for having killed, but they haven't either been found or identified. So, but yeah, I would say most of the cases that we worked on are homicides. Most of the disappearances that I worked on, and I'm just trying to think how many, I probably did 10. I could be lowballing that. I just don't want to overstate my experience.
Okay.
But most of the cases that I can think of that would come in, we knew there was foul play, so it was likely a homicide. There was some evidence of something happened, not just somebody just disappeared. Now the disappearance is where you just don't know. I haven't done many of those at BAU, but we've covered one on our show now.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. Okay. So low percentage. And really, I can't say I'm surprised. I shouldn't be surprised by your answer because in my work, once again, about 340 disappearances covered now. We rarely talk about the FBI, at least from a standpoint of actually being involved. We've talked a lot about how the families wish the FBI would get involved, but the local police department won't do that, or the state police won't do that, or they tried to do that and the FBI didn't want to get involved, or whatever else. We've covered very, very few where the FBI was actually came in and did what you did in your work. Very few. So you saying that you only did like 10 in all of your years working there, I guess that shouldn't surprise me then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of times we don't get involved unless we're asked. And I can't think of a time where where the BAU was asked to assist. And, opening these cases are not my decision. Yeah. They're a decision of my boss, but I can't think of a time where my boss said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to help you. Even the equivocal cases, or even cases where people really believe the person just walked off, we would always say, of course, we'll help. We'll provide that. Mm-hmm. So it really just comes to, are we being asked to assist? And, it's kind of reflective on if we're asked. And now it could be the local FBI office is asked and they, for whatever reason, decline. But I'm not aware of any situation like that either.
Okay. All right. So
usually when people
for future reference, if a family ever tells me, well, the police contacted the FBI and the FBI said they didn't want to get involved, I guess I just need to put that back in the mind that probably maybe the police department is lying. Maybe.
Well, I don't know that they're lying, but there's always miscommunication. But what I will tell you from my own experience being in the Boston FBI office, I recall very clearly when Molly Bish went missing and the FBI volunteered to assist. And, at the time, the FBI, Boston didn't have a great reputation and there were issues. I don't know. There's always issues between agencies.
Sure.
And we were not invited in to assist, and we never assisted on that case. But I can tell you, we had a meeting, Boston's evidence response team had a meeting with our team leader. And I remember, and I was pretty new, so I wasn't vocal, but I remember some of the more senior agents being like, why aren't we helping? Why aren't we involved? I mean, we can go search, we can, comb the woods. And so it was a lot of contention, and it was just, they don't want us involved. And, that's how it was. So I can say that from my experience, we want to be involved.
Okay.
But those decisions too are made way above my head.
Okay. Very good. Gotcha. Let's now move on to, of course, you're retired now.
Yes.
And you now do this podcast called The Consult. Just very simply, why and when?
So I started it after I retired, and I do it with 3 other retired FBI profilers. So we started 3 years ago, but I took a hiatus and took a break from it and then got back involved last year again.
Okay.
And the why, just because I wanted to continue to do the work that I loved with the people that I love to work with, bring attention to certain cases, bring a better understanding to what criminal profiling is and isn't, what it's really like. Mm-hmm. We talk through cases. We talk about cases that are solved that we worked on. We've talked about cases that are unsolved. Yeah. And we're starting to get involved in cases now that we didn't look at when we were at the BAU, but now we're looking at on our show. And our show is unscripted, other than I may script out, the brief overview of the case, but it's unscripted. It's really us working through our process and challenging ideas and theories and evidence. We don't always agree on everything. We try to come to our best conclusions. And So highlighting cases that may not otherwise have been highlighted. We've covered a couple of higher profile cases as well. And we're going to continue to cover some cases that we were involved in that were solved so that we can show how the process worked and maybe didn't work, like where we were wrong and why. We have cases like that we can cover and show how, and show how it's helpful and how sometimes we're not always going to be right. But the one thing I'll say about profiling is that we may not always be right about every prediction or detail, but I do believe we always bring a very well educated and knowledgeable and experienced viewpoint that will cause investigators maybe to think about things or rethink things or look at something in a different way. I think there's value to it. It doesn't solve cases, and I make that very clear. Profiling does not solve cases, but it can help. It can help prioritize suspects. It can help us understand the crime better. It can help us understand a motivation better. It can help prioritize suspects. If you have multiple suspects, which one is this more likely to be versus this? Linkage analysis, linking cases together that you don't have forensic evidence to link them. So there's so many things that can be done, but it's not going to be, so-and-so is the killer. It will never be that way. And anyone who claims that it is just a charlatan. So I'm very realistic about it. And our show is, there's no fluff. There are no gimmicks. It's not sensational. It is, there are no bells or whistles. It is just,
it's very straightforward. That's what I like about it. Very straightforward. Yes.
Yes. We don't spend a lot of time chit chatting.
No.
We have our moment, as you know, like we have our moments where we might joke around, but you're not going to hear that on the show. And I am very careful about that kind of stuff, because what I never want anyone to think is that we take these things lightly, or we take what the victims have experienced or what the families are going through. I would never, it just has to be 100% professional. I've had people comment that they like me better when I'm interviewed on other shows. And like my personality, which is, I guess, a compliment. It's kind of a backwards compliment, but because I have more of my personality, but my show is not going to change because it's a consult. It's professional. It's how we did our job. And we may come back to topics. We think we've talked about a topic, like, wait a second, I'm not okay with this. I want to come back and talk about this again. So, and I don't edit anything out except, maybe as breaks and stuff like that, or if there's there has been some cases that we've covered, and I know information is not public. I don't make that information public. And if it's something in order to do an accurate profile, I wouldn't cover the case.
Okay. And I was just going to ask you about that. Being that, once again, you're a retired FBI agent, there's information that you had access to that still the public still does not have access to, may never have access to. And so I even have it in the notes here. Is this a situation, for example, if I ever watch any YouTube videos like with retired military people, they always say, this, my views expressed do not express or not I'm speaking as a free person or whatever. I'm not speaking for the United States military. I've even had like some airline pilots who do YouTube channels, always want to make sure they're distancing themselves from their airline that they work for or whatever else. For you as a former FBI agent, anything like that, that your former superiors or whatever okay with you doing this, talking about these cases, even if they're unsolved, they're all okay with that? Or
well, so that here I go. I'm like, well, that means I'm delaying the answer.
Yeah.
So on case, that's a good point. I don't say, oh, these are just our views. I probably should put that caveat. These are just our opinions. Okay. But I do. I mean, we say that a lot. This is just our opinions. It's us looking at it. It could change if there's more evidence. If it's an FBI case, I will ask permission to cover it. And those get declined. I will tell you.
Okay.
And if it's a case that is not like if it's not one that we worked on, then I obviously I talk with the police department. Another consideration doing a podcast now is reaching out to victim families as well. Just letting them know when appropriate and when possible. It's not always possible in certain cases. And but if it is possible, just letting them know and addressing any questions or concerns that they might have. I mean, certainly I don't want any victim or victim's family member to Google something and say, oh, they're talking about my mother's murder, so so that's another consideration in terms of asking permission. But yes, I do contact the police departments or the FBI and ask permission, and also to make sure that we're not interfering with anything. Like sometimes there's one case where I was told, I contact the police department, like, well, there's developments coming up, so hold off. And so I waited and waited, and there's been nothing. So
you fell for that. You actually fell for that as an FBI agent, Julia Callie. You actually fell for a police department.
I'm an optimistic person, so I was hopeful. I'm like, okay, that's great, but yeah, but most departments are very very supportive. If it's a solved case with the FBI, that's fine. Actually, I should say, when I was joking, when I've been declined, there's one case that is an FBI investigation, and I reached out and asked if we could cover it because it's unsolved. And they preferred that we did not. Now, I don't understand necessarily that reasoning, just because, I think anytime you can bring attention to something, it's a good thing. So.
Yeah, going back to what you said, well, there's developments coming. You do not even know how many of my guests have been told that.
That's interesting.
And no, that's, and then, and I, of course, now, maybe early on, like in the first 50 disappearances, that, they tell me that, because I'm reaching out, or my assistant Emily is reaching out, and the family says, well, we want to talk to you, but they're telling us there are developments, and we would fall for that. 340 disappearances in, when some family tells me that, I just outright tell them, I'm not here to offend you, but there's nothing going on.
That's good to know.
They're telling you that because they don't want this unsolved disappearance that's been unsolved for 25 years, to make it back into the media. All right. That's what I've learned. Maybe we'll get into that with my interview tomorrow. But when you say that, I'm like, honestly, I'm going to guess 100 of my guests have been told like kind of the same thing. You would not realize the lengths the police departments will try to talk families out of talking to reporters like me or you or whoever else. It's something. It's something.
Yeah.
In fact, now we eventually did end up covering this disappearance. I'm not going to say what it was, but she was going to get interviewed. She goes, well, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to see if there's any updates. I want to have the most updated information. I said, don't do that, because they're going to tell you not to do anything. They're going to tell you don't speak to them. That's exactly what they did. She says, Ed, I can't talk to you right now. They've told me I can't do that because they're working on them, saying, I told this young woman, they're lying to you. There's nothing going on. I don't mean to make you feel bad, but this is what my experience tells me. 2 years later, it was the same thing. She finally did do an interview with me. It's just...
And then, on the reverse side, I've reached out to prosecutors' offices, and they're super excited that we're going to bring attention to an unsolved homicide. And I just talked to a prosecutor the other day, and obviously they can't tell you anything, but you can share your observations. And he was really appreciative. And he's like, stay in touch. Let me know when the show comes out. And so you get different results. I mean, most of the time I have been met with a positive response. So
you're very fortunate. Maybe it's because they know you're a former FBI agent. I can't tell you how many times I don't even call police departments anymore. as much as they've blown me off over the last like almost 8 years.
Yeah.
And once again, I also have a principle. I don't talk to anybody who's not going to tell me anything. So, because we're in the information business. It's all a very interesting topic. Maybe we'll talk about that once again when you can start asking me the questions. I don't want to steal your thunder here. So, okay. And so how's it been going? So, is this something you thought you'd be doing before you ever retired, that you'd be doing a podcast, or was it like, I'm retired, still want to be involved in this? There's podcasting. I'll try that.
So I kind of thought so. I would joke around with some of my coworkers that maybe I should do a podcast, and then, but it was kind of serious, but also not really sure if I would really follow through. I just didn't know. I had no idea what I was getting into. But when I retired, my colleagues got me 24 mugs that said the consult on it, my merch. And so I guess I have to do a podcast now. I have all these mugs.
Well, that's one reason. It's a reason.
Yeah. So I'm like, I have to follow through with it. And I called my, other retired colleagues and I said, do you guys want to do this with me? And I had no idea, Ed, what I was getting into, how much work it would be, how hard it would be. That's kind of how I just got into it. And then really the first time I just told one of my colleagues, like, I think we should just we'll start off with the Golden State Killer. And we're just going to talk about what we did. Let's just see what happens. And I just made it into a show.
Okay.
Sure. People are like, what is this?
How many episodes do you have now?
40.
40. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're up to 40. We're going to release the 41st episode. And it's all a combination, as I mentioned earlier, of some solved, unsolved.
Yes.
And some that we worked on at BAU, others that we didn't work on yet. And so I'm finding people reaching out and wanting to present cases to us and give us ideas. And so that's really great. We have plenty of work to do now. At first I was like, are we going to have enough material to talk about? But we do.
Yeah.
And we have to turn down a lot of people because we can't just profile a case just on media reports. We really do need to have access to crime scene photos or autopsy results or things, just certain cases where, and sometimes that is available. And then other cases, we're just never going to be able to have access to those things. So I have to say, I just don't think we can do a fair job. So.
Okay. And what's interesting to me, 40 episodes, and you've already worked on 2 disappearances, at least, that Unfound is covered. Of course, Jody Husentrude, and then the most recently, the episodes on Bill Underhill, which is a disappearance I featured, I don't know, 5-6 years ago now it must be.
Well, I have a feeling based on how many shows you've done, if I just pick a disappearance out of a hat, you've probably done it. So,
maybe you have to remember there's like 23,000 listed disappearances on NamUs, and I've covered 340 disappearances. So I don't. But yeah, that's interesting. Given 40 that you've already done 2. Of course, both of those are kind of collected to Caroline Lowe, which is kind of where we started this conversation. She's very involved in both of those.
Yeah. 6 degrees of Caroline Lowe.
6 degrees of Caroline.
That's how,
Yes.
That's how I look at it. But I find, and I'm sure this is why you've dedicated your whole show to it. The disappearances, to me, they're very challenging cases, but they're rewarding for me. I feel like I'm doing a small part, however small, in trying to bring a spotlight to some of these cases or help keep a spotlight on a case. And I find that very rewarding if I can do a small part. So the disappearances will probably end up doing more of them now that we've done a couple, doing more of them at some point.
Great.
Likely you've already done them. So
well, maybe not. I mean, the odds are probably not, but certainly, I think that's a great choice. And I should ask you, your co-hosts, did you actually work with them? They're co-workers, or you knew them while you were all in the FBI working together?
Yes, we were working together. Now, 2 of them were senior to me. So they'd been in the unit many years prior to me. And then another one, we went through training together. And so at the BAU, so we were in the same class, that 16 weeks of classroom, we were together. So, but yes, I did work with them. And yeah.
Okay. What's the hardest thing? What has been your most surprising, maybe hardest thing about putting this podcast together? Maybe what is something you did not expect before you started doing this? Maybe just not with the cases, but actually putting the podcast actually together to make it listenable for the public.
Well, I started out having to do doing all the editing myself, but now, which was hard. And even though we don't edit out and rearrange anything, there's certain things you got to take out and sidebars or things when you go off topic or those are the only things I edit out, but I don't edit out anything that contributes to the profile or the process. And so that was hard, just that amount of time spent. Now I have someone that helps me with the editing, so that's helped a little bit. I think the hardest thing is not so much the work on it or the research or actually doing it, because I did it for as my job. So that's not what's hard. I think what's hard is my worry about, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to re-traumatize families. I want them to be okay when they listen to our show. We just did Bill Underhill, as you know.
Yes.
And we worked with the two cold case investigators, a retired Minneapolis police sergeant and her sister. And they volunteer to work on these cases, and they've done a very good job, and they've gotten very close with Bill's family. And they wanted this presented in a way that the family would approve, like be okay with. You just don't know, And so they were very just waiting to hear the first episode, and it meant a lot to them. Yeah. And it meant a lot to me that they were okay with it, and that with their appearance on our show,
right?
Because I know how much it meant to them for the family. And just kind of waiting to hear, I would get messages from Holly Kegel, who was the retired Minneapolis police sergeant. And she's like, "Oh, that episode was great. That first episode thing." And I was so relieved. And she said Bill's sisters really appreciated it. But it really creates a lot of stress. Okay. Anytime, I know families want their loved ones' cases highlighted, but it's still traumatic. Oh, yeah. They have to listen and, hear it all over again if they choose to do so. And so it's not just they're happy with you. It's hard. This is not a good thing. And you're talking about their loved one. You're talking about the worst thing that's ever happened to them, very likely. Yeah. And I think that really worries me. In the FBI, as a profile, I could say whatever I wanted to police.
Yes.
And when I say whatever I wanted, I could be candid, and that wasn't going to get directly to the family. Now doing the show, you have to be cognizant that what you're saying may be heard by family members. And even when they know, even when they know you're going to do a show and they've approved it and they're okay with it, you still have that lingering thing. I hope they're okay with this. I hope that they like the way that we covered this. Mm-hmm. One of the things in Bill's case is, at the end, my colleague Bob just said, "Bill's dead." And so I told Holly, and I said, I know that could be hard for them to hear that, even though they're very logical. They know he's likely dead, but hearing that may be hard for them. And she's like, we're prepared, but so little things like that. I think that's the hardest part for me. That's something I did not have to deal with when I was in the BAU.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
This is my choice to do this. And, I just wait, as I'm sure you do, the day to some of these cases getting solved.
Yeah, I do. Yes. Yeah, and the tough part, I think, from my side of it, with these disappearances, is that, I'm 53 years old. Let's say I make it to 85. Unfortunately, the odds say that I'll make it to 85, and there are many disappearances I've already featured on the podcast that will not be solved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'd never name which ones I think they are, and certainly I could be wrong, but it's that. It's when I
Mm-hmm.
think about that, that's when the job starts to suck a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, you're right. And being honest, being honest with these families, you got to be. You got to be honest with them. So I hear what you're saying about your co-host there saying, well, I think Bill Huntersville's dead, and I could talk about it because that's a disappearance that I've featured as well. Is that you look at Bill's compared to like 50 other disappearances that are like his. Yeah, a lot of these guys did end up being dead.
Mm-hmm.
Just from a statistics point of view, it's probably what it means. But statistics can be wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
For sure. For
So
sure.
those are my things, I guess I didn't realize going into the podcast. And and not everybody appreciates just, I guess, when I say there's no bells or whistles.
Yeah.
Some people really want an answer. They want a closure. They want to know, this is my opinion. And if I'm going to be honest about profiling, I have to say that everything is, this most likely happened, is a caveat everything. We have to do that. That is how profiling works. It's based on probabilities, and it's based on what we know about the case. And we don't have access to every bit of information in any case at any point in time. So you have to just be careful with how you're presenting it. And some people really appreciate that. And some people are like, this is boring. This is not,
Yeah.
And I get that. So we're never going to be a super popular podcast. We're going to have our niche.
Yep.
Our niche or whatever, in the true crime world. And I hope to do some good, but I realize it's just the way our show is and how we do it. It's very authentic. It's very bare bones. And so it's not going to be for everybody. But I hope that people who are interested in criminal profiling and want to see how it really works are interested in it and try to be educational, not only highlighting cases, but being educational.
And we should go over not just Bill Underhill, but Jody Husentrude. But, but also very recently, probably maybe one of the most bizarre murder cases in the United States in the 21st century. That would be Robert Wone. Of course, that went to trial, and all those guys were found not guilty. Can you comment on that? Of course, from your experience, of course, you're looking at it. This was not my understanding, this was not a disappearance you were involved in while you were. This was not one that made it onto your desk at the FBI, correct?
Correct. So my colleague on the show, she was part of the evidence response team that processed the scene.
All right.
And it was a case that she told me about when we were in training at BAU. And it was just always a very interesting case. And it was actually when we were beginning our training at BAU, was about the time that it was going to trial. And now the three suspects in the case were not charged with Robert Wone's murder. They were charged with evidence tampering and a cover-up, basically.
Yes.
So, they couldn't prove who killed him, but they tried to prove that they were all participating in a cover-up. And it was a bench trial, and the judge did acquit them. Although in her decision, she said she believed one of them to be responsible for the murder. She believed that there was a cover-up, but she couldn't really say who did what or what their intention was in certain things. And so ultimately they were found not guilty. It's an extraordinary decision. It's like she knows that they're guilty, but she just can't say who's guilty of what. And ultimately she says that she believed they're responsible for his murder. One of them, at least one of them.
Right.
So And
Right.
my
And I've even made the comment on my own disappearances. When you're covering a disappearance or a murder that has its own Wikipedia page, you know that it's something that it really is unique and stands out and everything. And of course, Robert Wone's does have its own Wikipedia page.
Yeah, they have I have to plug the website Who Murdered Robert Wone, which was
Right. Yes.
created at the time that the first affidavit came out on the case. It was like 2 years after his murder, and there was an arrest affidavit. And you know, the people that started the website, they're from this area, DuPont Circle area. And they just started accumulating information on the case. They attended the trial, and it's just this huge depository, I guess, of information on the case. And I would consider them experts on the case. And I had them on the show. It was fascinating.
It was. I listened to every word. Yes, very great.
Yeah.
Great.
And you know, part of our work there, you know, it was there are a lot of I think things forensically that didn't make sense or couldn't be explained. And I went into that hoping that I could answer some of those questions. And when I started, I didn't know what those answers would be. But I think when I finished it, I cannot tell you who killed Robert Wone, but I can tell you that I made sense out of the evidence in my own mind, and hopefully the listeners heard and they see why I at least had my opinions and why my colleagues had their opinions and what we base those opinions on. And it really takes a case, in my opinion, that seemed crazy and really makes it make much more sense.
Did you come away from those murders? Of course, now we know that, of course, they were not charged with murder or anything, as you've already stated. Mistakes made in that investigate. Once again, if you were to go back to your days when you were working for TBI and you're on, right there when it happens, can you look back at that and say there were mistakes made in the investigation early on that really hampered getting conviction on anything or not?
There is a lot of criticism about the processing of the crime scene, and the Washington Metropolitan Police Department processed it first, and then the FBI came in later to try to reprocess it, which is highly unusual. That doesn't usually happen. Okay. And I think that people are very critical of the processing of the crime scene, but I think that somewhat of that criticism is undue criticism, because they spent a lot of time in that house, weeks, processing it. And ultimately they ended up, because they couldn't find any blood. Like there's this, like, where'd all the blood go? You stabbed 3 times. There's no blood. And I think that's what was very confusing at first. They spent weeks and weeks looking for the blood, and they used a reagent that wasn't meant to look for cleaned up blood. And that just made a mess of the whole house. And I think people think, oh, the whole thing was botched. Now, if you know how a crime scene is processed, you don't ever apply chemicals until you're done with everything else. So, they searched that house from top to bottom, and they took, over 100 samples from around the house of where blood could have been. And they took the drains, and they just didn't find it. And ultimately use this chemical to see, okay, can we come up with anything? And that it just didn't work. And I think people think, okay, the whole crime scene was botched, and that just wasn't the case. I mean, so that's my opinion, that it wasn't as poorly done as people think that it was done. I think it was a little bit of a, people think it was a big mistake, and maybe they would have found some little spot that got wiped away, but I doubt it. I just don't believe that there was a major cleanup in the house. And I think if there had been major cleanup in the time frame that they had, the team would have found something. They would have found a sign. It's almost impossible to clean up the amount of blood they alleged was missing from Robert's body in that period of time. They didn't have very long. And so that's my opinion. And I don't like to be a person that goes back and criticizes things, but people know when they make mistakes, and I think the only mistake was the chemical they applied at the end, but I don't think that ultimately impacted the finding of any evidence.
Okay.
So I think that, and then in terms of, potentially interviews and maybe some of the interviews could have been done a little more gently or in some ways. And, but I don't think that even that would have ultimately ended up in a confession anyway.
Okay.
So.
And you should know, the listeners should know, you devoted how many episodes? I guess they're about an hour long. How many episodes did you devote? 4?
9.
9, 5, 9, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, we
9
started out.
episodes.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
started
so
out.
yeah.
I wasn't sure, but we just had so much to go over and talk about and debate. And I had so many questions. I wanted to get it right. I don't know if I got it all right. But I feel that I did so much side research as well, like looking at, the number of cases where someone's stabbed and they have defensive wounds, and the testing that's done when you're looking for semen and all. I spent a lot of time doing research and looking at all the court records and documents, and really, because this was, in my mind, I approached as this is just a forensic mystery here. And, like I said, I felt like I was at least able to answer some of those mysterious questions, and maybe other people just disagree. They think we're wrong, but, I think the evidence speaks for itself. The crime scene speaks for itself. And this wasn't a major cleanup. This wasn't a major, doesn't mean there's not a cover up, but, there's not missing blood. There's, I don't believe Robert was sexually assaulted. Those things that created to the mystery.
Okay.
But you have to listen to the show to hear
Right.
why.
Right. And yeah, that's why we're telling everybody. The podcast is called The Consult. 40 episodes in, 9 of which are devoted to, like I said, murder's really not my thing. One of the most bizarre murders in the United States of the 21st century, the murder of Robert Wone, devoted 9 episodes to that. But the most recent couple of episodes are to the disappearance of Bill Underhill, the disappearance we featured on Unfound. And then if you want to go back further than Robert Wone, you talk about Jody Huisentruit, disappearance in a couple episodes as well. All right, let's move on just to some general discussion, and we will be done with this interview that's going to be going over 3 hours. But as everybody knows, I don't care, because this is all going to get split up into sections, and everybody's going to hear everything that Joy had to say. Starting here, being that you are now a podcaster, when you were an FBI agent and talking with other FBI agents, how aware were you of the true crime community and all these podcasts and everything? How aware were you of that?
I was somewhat aware. I listened to true crime podcasts, and I certainly knew Jerry Williams' podcast. One of my coworkers, who was a brand new agent, brought it to my attention. He said, before I became an FBI agent, I just loved Jerry Williams' podcast. I listened to everything because he was interested in becoming an FBI agent. So, and then I listened to the first podcast I ever listened to was Criminology, and they covered the Zodiac. That was the very first podcast I think I ever listened to, was Zodiac. So, going back on my interests, I was interested in Zodiac. And
now the Zodiac comes up. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Well, it was always an interest, but that was the first actual coverage of a case. So I was aware, and I listened to a lot of the popular ones, at least once or twice. And, so I was pretty much aware. Now that I'm really involved in it, I'm much more aware of the podcast and the true crime community that I wasn't aware of, and certainly the disagreements that are out there that I wasn't quite aware of were so prevalent. But I love podcasts. I really do. I listen to them all the time. I listen to while I'm cooking, driving.
Wow.
I just find them interesting. Whether it's somebody who's going to analyze a case, or whether they're just it's a storytelling. I listen to a lot of different ones, and I listen to ones as well where I think they might have I might disagree with them, because I think it's important to understand, like someone else's viewpoint. And whereas some people don't like listening to people they disagree with, I find it very helpful. Sometimes it opens my mind to something else. Sometimes I realize, okay, I don't agree with that. Here's my basis, and here's how I can shut down that argument. But I really do like to try to find podcasts. If there's a case I feel strongly about, I'll say, I want to see what this side says.
All right. So I'll ask you, have you ever listened to a podcast covering a disappearance or murder that you actually did work on and listen to it and think, oh my, they don't know what the hell they're talking about at all. Have you ever? Don't name any names. We
No,
don't
I
do that.
won't.
Don't name it. I'm not here to be controversial like that. But have you ever done that and thought, oh my gosh?
The only thing I have seen, and it wasn't a podcast, it was a documentary, just some characterizations of Joe D'Angelo prior to him being caught, and those were based on media reports, and it was kind of just these general characteristics of serial killers. So that's the only thing I've really thought, oh, that's totally wrong. I don't agree with that, but what are you saying? But I have heard a lot of podcasts on cases that I have covered, and I can't think of one that I'm just completely like that. They're totally wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. Actually, True Crime Garage has covered a couple cases that I didn't, and they actually covered Brandy Hall as well. And I think they've done a good job on some cases. Now, I can't think of any that you've done that I did when I was in the Bureau.
Okay.
But the cases that we covered on our show and you've covered on your show, you and I tend to kind of think alike.
Oh, do we? Okay.
I feel like we do. I think you're very
okay.
Yeah. Do you not think so?
I don't know. I don't know if I've really thought about that. That's interesting. Maybe that'll be a discussion for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it hasn't occurred to me.
The shows of yours that I've listened to, there's not anything that I thought to myself, I completely disagree. You base your opinions on what I think is good, rational thought.
I appreciate that. The thing is, though, you should know, though, we don't do a lot of theorizing. You maybe have noticed that we don't do a lot of theorizing. On the interviews.
But you do on a couple of the ones I've listened to. You have your opinions, I think.
Okay. Yeah, we just try to stay away from theories. We try to stay away from things like, well, if Jane Doe, killed John Smith and caused this disappearance, then we try to stay away from that. That's probably what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though. All right. Well, maybe we'll get into that tomorrow. So none where you were actually working on a case and then you found out there was a podcast about it and you went and listened to it and said, you know what, buddy, I have the information here right in front of me and what you're talking about is totally off. Nothing like that.
I cannot think of anything where I just think, I'm just trying to think that's totally wrong. I cannot think. There are times where I'll listen to a podcast and I think their conclusions I don't agree with, or I know their work, they don't have maybe all the information that I had at the time, but I can't think of anything that I think, oh, that's just, terrible.
Okay.
I really can't. Yeah.
That's fine. I know you're being honest. I have no doubt about that. It's just, I have being that you've been on both sides of the microphone and in fact, in a professional position, I'm guessing eventually maybe there will be a podcast that covers something that you did work on and then you'll listen to it. I mean, I hope you live to be 150, but somewhere down the road, you will, listen to something and you'll be like, you know what, buddy, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I saw the case file and it's totally off. And you let me know when that happens. You'll have to let me
I must listen to good quality podcasts because I haven't really come across anything where I would just say this is just completely off.
Okay.
But like I said, there might be sometimes opinions I don't agree with, but if they have a basis for why they think, then I like, okay, that's what they think,
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to this. Maybe a lot of people don't know this, but I know this. You probably surely know this. Why are USA murder closure rates worse now than they were 50 years ago, despite forensics, DNA, and everything else?
Probably the number one reason I would say would be resources. volume of crime, resources that police departments have. Cases are becoming more complex. Let's see, what other reasons? CSI effect. So expectations of the public to be, have, not just beyond a reasonable doubt, but beyond all doubt in certain cases.
Yeah.
I think too, we see, especially in the area where I live and the crime problem in the city that I live near, witness reluctance, people reluctant to become involved, or I didn't see anything. So I think there's just, those are probably what contribute to them. Yeah. And I think a lot of times certain departments, they are just swamped and running from case to case to case. And that can make it difficult. And they don't have all the resources or the, the number of employees. It'd be nice if every detective had just one case and they had a whole staff.
Right.
Not the case. That's just not the case.
Yeah.
And then, you see, unfortunately, people are reluctant to go into law enforcement.
Yeah.
So, which is unfortunate, but it has become, such a, I think it would be a very difficult decision for some younger person today to make a decision to go into law enforcement based on how law enforcement can be viewed and the inherent issues that law enforcement officers face now. So
I guess what I'm saying,
the full staff you would like to have.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, once again, I'm really not necessarily in the public anymore because I do this as a job. I was never an FBI agent, but certainly I'm a professional podcaster that specializes in disappearances, and I have spoken at schools and trying to teach criminal justice majors about disappearances and things, because my public perception is that, first of all, just me, once again, I was born in 1970, that people think that the United States is a much more violent place than it was in 1970, whereas the FBI statistics say that's not true. I think the public perception is that, wow, murders, due to DNA and everything, man, there are a lot more violent crimes are getting solved today. That's not true either. And so I'm wondering where the if you have you were in the FBI and an expert, a professional, do you have a perception of why that is? Less violent according to the statistics, but less crimes getting solved.
Yeah,
Even though
I think I covered it, just the resources, the CSI effect. The cases are more complex. It's difficult. It's difficult these days. It's not the same as it used to be in putting together cases. And you have a lot of people that don't want to be involved in a lot of these cases. So I think it's just a combination. And the biggest thing I saw in the BAU when it came to cases, is just departments not having enough resources. Okay. That was what I saw. And that's, I'm not really a criminologist, or I can't really figure out society wise why. But I do know detectives are so overworked, and they are just sometimes jumping from one case to another, and they're just juggling many things. And I think that is, from my perspective, a big problem, unfortunately. But in terms of all the other things that may go into that, I don't know that I can say with any expertise.
Okay.
But certainly with certain cases, an attorney may not want to bring it to trial because the juries have expectations that they didn't maybe used to have in terms of beyond a reasonable doubt versus beyond all doubt, and what forensics can and can't do. And certainly TV has made it seem like we should be able to solve all crimes. You should be able to get DNA off of anything. If you touch something, there should definitely be a fingerprint.
Yes.
And when you have these inherent weaknesses in a case that are going to be in every case, juries are expecting more. And so prosecutors probably maybe are reluctant to bring them forward. I'm just hypothesizing.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, great. Just once again, you're in law enforcement. I just wanted to get your insight into it, being, of course, your career for many years. This question actually was earlier in the outline, but I didn't ask it to you. But I didn't ask you. I'm going to ask you now. What is the number one thing that Hollywood TV shows or Netflix or movies or whatever gets right about the FBI, and what is the number one thing they get wrong about the FBI?
Was that in the outline?
It was in the outline. Yes, it was up near it was up near. Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. Let me see. Maybe I worded it a different way, but it was up here during the.
Okay. So what I will say, I'll start with what they get wrong first.
Okay.
The amount of paperwork.
Okay.
It is so much writing in the FBI. And it doesn't matter what kind of case you work. I mean, some investigators, whether if they're working white collar, maybe not as reactive as those working violent crime, but it all comes down to everything you do. You have to write it down. You have to write reports. There's a ton of red tape and you are at your desk so much. And writing and typing and getting approvals for things. And none of that makes TV. And okay. I think certainly too, the TV doesn't capture like how long it takes to build a case. In FBI case, the local cases and state cases go along much faster, but in the FBI, things are really slow. It takes a long time. And I think people don't realize how long it takes, which I think can be detrimental to cases, because when something happens and you're not going to trial until, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years later, that can be problematic, of course. Mm-hmm. And certainly with the BAU and, TV shows like Criminal Minds, what they get wrong is how active and involved the BAU is in the investigation. Like we're not out arresting people. We're not interviewing people. We're not conducting the investigation. We're consulting. We may go to the crime scene, but oftentimes, those crime scenes, are, from so long ago that right. They've changed in some. So we're not at a fresh crime scene. But we're not part of the investigation, and certainly TV, that's not how it's portrayed. It's got to be much more exciting. So I think generally it just makes the FBI seem a lot more exciting than it is. Now, I don't want to say that my work wasn't very rewarding and that weren't exciting moments and things that got my adrenaline going, but it's really not quite as active as it would be portrayed on TV. Now, what do they get right?
Yeah, and technically, I had any TV show or movie that has actually captured what it's like to work at the FBI is actually what's it really like working at the FBI. So, I maybe expounded a little bit on my.
I can't think of a show that gets it right. But what I will tell you, okay. I'm going to take that back.
Okay.
One show that I really thought did a great job was Mindhunter.
Oh.
And it was sort of a fictionalized version of how the FBI's behavioral analysis unit got started. But what they did do is they recreated interviews of certain serial killers. And they redid those interviews based on transcripts and the videos that were done. And I've seen some of those original interviews, and to see that on TV, the way that it was done was so authentic to me.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, and the actors that they chose, it was just so well done. It gave me chills. It was incredible acting, and it was just recreated verbatim from the original interview. So I would say that is probably the one moment like, this is spot on. This is exactly how it happened. This is how the serial killer behaved. This is what they did. You know, Charles Manson jumped up on the table, you know, that kind of stuff. Really well done. Now the rest of it, you know, it's fictionalized, like their personal lives and, you know, some of the dialogue and the characters were changed a bit, but I really did enjoy that show quite a bit.
I'll just maybe ask you this. Did you ever have a time when you were in the FBI where some show came out portraying the FBI or a movie, you and your coworkers go into work the next day and you're around the water cooler saying, man, I can't believe that people really think that we do these things this way. Ever have a conversation like that? You know,
Not
with your
in
colleagues,
real,
like, man, did they really think we do things this way or what?
not in real time, but a lot, like a movie that would always be brought up would be Point Break with Keanu Reeves. So that
I know that was coming.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of jokes made about that, and I'm an FBI agent or something, like lines, you know. So that people would poke fun of that movie quite a bit, but I think most people really did enjoy the movie secretly.
Oh yeah, I love that movie. I mean, I'm you know, I was 21, 22 when it came out. Of course, that's a spectacular movie. But yeah.
So people would talk about that movie quite a bit. You know, personally, I love The Silence of the Lambs. It's not realistic. But I mean, it's based on, you know, certain conglomeration of certain serial killers, and the rest of it not realistic. Some of it's authentic in that it's filmed at the FBI Academy, and you know, like I said, real FBI agents were in it. My squad mate was in it as well as your mother. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yes.
So, but you know, it's not realistic, but I did love it.
Okay.
So.
Do they being that I didn't bring up Point Break, but you brought up Point Break, I have to ask, do they really make you dive into a pool blindfolded to look for like a weight, like they had Gary Busey's character doing that in that one scene in that movie? Do they really make you do that? They don't.
No, but I'll tell you what they did have us do. They we had to jump into a pool and take our pants off. I mean, we were in bathing suits, by the way. So
okay. It's a PG show.
Yes, but it, you know, and make a flotation device out of our pants.
Oh yeah.
So I couldn't do that right now. Maybe I could. I don't really know why they had us do that. I mean, I never had to jump in the water as an agent.
Okay. All right. Just asking. All right. So we got that out of the way. That scene where Gary Busey jumps in the pool, made up. All right. Moving on. Being that you've been on both sides of the microphone, I have to ask you this. So maybe I seen like one article, maybe a month that comes up regarding this. Does the USA culture have a true crime problem in that lots of complaints that true crime is treated, you know, the pain of others is treated as entertainment? Being that you're on the microphone, same side as I am, do you think we have a problem, or how do you view it?
Well, I think the U.S. has a significant cultural phenomenon surrounding true crime in maybe the ways other countries. I mean, I've never lived in another country, but probably in the ways other countries don't. I think this can be good and bad. You know, there's certainly a psychological appeal to true crime. We're interested in the darker side of things, and in that it is entertainment for some people.
Yeah.
And I hate to describe it as entertainment. I do. I mean, I watch it as entertainment. I listen to it as entertainment. I find it extremely interesting. You know, if it weren't for true crime, I never would have gone into the career that I went in. You know, it motivated me. It, you know, it's just something, it's a job I wanted to do. So I can't really fault it, but and I'm going to actually do a show on the ethics at some point of true crime, because you're asking a very important question. But
excellent.
It is an entertainment, and other people's tragedies and the worst things that happen become become entertainment for people, and sides get chosen. This person's guilty, this person's innocent. People fight about it, and I think that's terrible for the case. And but I don't know what ethical true crime could be. That's why I want to talk about it. I like to think I'm ethical, but am I just rationalizing what I'm doing?
Yeah.
I try to contribute. I try to do good things, but should I be doing it at all? I mean, it's an ethical question that I think needs to be asked, and I certainly need to shine that, on my own work.
Yeah.
I think it can be good. I think it raises awareness. It highlights cases. Victims can share their experience. Sometimes that's good for victims to be able to do that. It can prompt the opening or reopening of investigations. It can prompt new looks. I mean, I will tell you, cold cases sit, and if it's brought to someone's attention, they may go out and pull the file. They may look at it like,
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Right.
That's a good thing. And some podcasts have resulted in more attention being paid to a case, and those cases ultimately getting solved. So it's a good thing. I think people can become desensitized to violence. They become desensitized to what victims' families are going through. Now, as I talked about earlier in our interview, I think I was more desensitized when I was in the BAU. And now that I'm out of the BAU and I'm doing this podcast and I'm actually talking directly with victims' families, I feel like I'm feeling emotions that I didn't feel before.
Right. Yeah. You were talking about how now you're talking to the families, and it's like being honest with them, and saying, well, you know what, I think, your loved one might be deceased or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And just telling, just talking to them, telling their stories and hearing about what they've gone through directly, rather than having that detective between me and the victims' families. And so I feel like I don't feel I'm desensitized, in the way maybe other people are, because I feel like I was more isolated when I was at BAU. The other problem, I think we glorify criminals.
Yeah.
When
Right.
when we covered Israel Keys, I think this is a good example. He is just a pathetic individual.
Yep.
And we shouldn't glorify him or make him out to be something that he's not, or any of them. So I think that can be dangerous too. We try not to do that. And then I think too, that true crime, they can influence public opinion. They might have an impact on the justice system in some cases. It's possible. And I've seen that, where public opinion gets swayed so far that this person did it, this person's guilty, and you find out later they didn't do it. And I think that's can be a problem with true crime. So I think we have to be really careful. But these are all good things to think about when we make our shows and do the shows. And I want an answer. I want to know, okay, what is ethical true crime? How can I do it so I'm 100% ethical? So I'm, because no matter what, it's entertainment. That's why people are listening. For majority of the people. But how can I do this the most responsible way? And who's the gatekeeper of what's ethical as well? Who makes that decision? We may decide, okay, we're never going to name suspects by name, but then we did it on our show.
Yeah.
And, and we can rationalize because we had to do it because they've been mentioned a million times before. So you got to be careful. Am I going down this slippery slope? I don't know. This is something that I struggle with, this true crime problem that we have. And, my interest and, my avid consumption of it, I want to, at least whatever I do, try to make it be as responsible as I can. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a loaded question, Ed. I just went on a rant.
That's all right. It's your interview. You're allowed to do that. You should. This is on my mind, of course, being that I've been doing this for almost 8 years. And the interesting thing is, one of the most outspoken people on this topic, who believes that true crime and the way it's handled with podcasts and everything is like the worst thing that's ever happened, she's like, I think the head of the Department of Criminology here at University of South Florida here in the Tampa area. And I've tried to get a meeting with her. And in fact, I've emailed her and tried to set up some forum where we can debate back, and forth the pluses and minuses of doing this. And she hasn't responded to me yet, but I guess I'll keep trying.
Yeah. And she may very well, I mean, I don't know her or who she is, but she may not want to contribute to what she thinks is ethically wrong. And it may just be any true crime podcast. So she's not going to want to participate. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just giving you an example that this is just coincidentally that, she's actually written a book on it, and has done speaking engagements and everything else. I'm just forgetting her name right now. Let's move on. So yeah, it's a big guy. And when you do this, I'll be interested to hear when you do get to this episode of your podcast, when you talk about the ethics and everything. I'm going to be very interested in that. Next question. Once again, since you were in the FBI, my perception, and I totally stay away from politics. I'm here to bring people together for disappearances. Do you sometimes maybe see the FBI getting into the news for all of the wrong reasons? A lot has been made maybe over like the last 10 years when it comes to politics. Is the FBI a tool for this party, for that party, for this political angle and everything else? As a former employee of the FBI, what can you say about that, if you want to say anything?
I don't like to get into politics at all either. And certainly my own political views have absolutely nothing to do with the work that I do. And I don't even sign petitions to not cut down trees because I don't want to. And I don't want to cut down trees if it's not necessary. But I don't want to ever, I always worry, well, what if a case came up where somebody was in the tree industry and I signed this and somebody would think I'm just really careful. And I will tell you that in the FBI, it's a nonpartisan organization. We don't align with any political party. That was ingrained into me. That is taught. It's from the very beginning. And we're not even supposed to, and I'm not saying this doesn't happen, but you're not supposed to have political conversations in the workplace. You're not supposed to put up anything that would show a political viewpoint or slant, and they're pretty strict about that. You can't do that. Now, I'm not going to say that doesn't happen at all, and that's a very politically correct answer there, right? We're not supposed to be political. I like to believe that the decisions being made, and I'm not part of those decisions and never have been that high up, are not based on political reasons. But I can certainly see why the public thinks that they are. I will tell you my own experience.
Okay.
That I do believe in my own experience that some decisions, whether to investigate or not investigate, may have been for political reasons or potentially repercussions down the line for a career or something. And not, that was my impression. I could be wrong, but I might have said it in a meeting. You're just not doing this because of this. Okay. And that was met with somebody who was extremely offended by what I said. So, human nature, it is so hard not to be biased. It's so hard. And so I can't say with all certainty that some decisions aren't made with, based on politics or however you lean. I guess that's the best way I can put it.
Okay. Because once again, my perception, the history of the FBI. Of course, we had J. Edgar Hoover, everybody, of course, a lot of rumors about him and everything else. But it seemed for a while, the 40s, 50s, 60s, then into the 70s, and we think about Watergate and all that stuff. We think of it. And in fact, it turned out that Deep Throat was a guy who was working for the FBI. And then it kind to my perception it was kind of very non-political. And then it seems just like this kind of politics and all this has crept in within like the 10 years after many years of it seemingly the FBI staying out of the news. It seems like it's back in these. Is your perception the same way, or do you perceive it a different way?
No, I perceive it the same way. Where the FBI has been in the news for a lot of the wrong reasons. And the FBI is supposed to keep a low profile in that arena.
Yeah.
And we're not supposed to be speaking for the Department of Justice. That's their job. We do the investigations. The Department of Justice is, who we work for or work under. So yeah, I do think and I don't like it. And I don't want that to be the perception, but unfortunately it is. And I understand why.
Okay. All right, we'll move on. Thank you for answering that. I know it's
I didn't answer. I know I'm being.
But I had the opportunity as a reporter. I have to ask.
Well, so far I don't think I dodged any of your questions, but I try to be careful. I mean, I know some people will listen to me and say she's just an FBI hack. She's just one of them.
I can't help that.
No, you can't. But I get it. It's the first time.
If you listen to my podcast long enough, you'll hear me ask guests. I'm sorry I have to ask this, but I have to. Just because I have to, there's some integrity that I have to keep with my job.
Yeah. I think somebody,
even though we're friends and you or a guest, you lost your son to a disappearance. I understand. I'm very sorry, but there's just things that I have to do. I've told my integrity as a reporter.
Mm-hmm.
So,
somebody did tell me I was typical FBI with my head in the sand. And I said, yep, 22 years. What can you do?
Okay. Let's move on to this.
Okay.
Once again, regarding crime in the United States, why does the USA have the highest incarceration rate in the free world? Too many laws, infringing of people's rights. I mean, a lot of other countries say a lot about the United States, a lot of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a very violent country. Look at you throwing all these people in jail. As a person who's probably been responsible for putting people in jail, how do you answer that? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that our attitude in the United States, we just really tough on crime policy. People need to be punished. And we have, for certain offenses, mandatory minimum sentencing, 3 strikes and you're out, truth in sentencing law, policies. And that's our attitude. We don't have a lot of other options either. We don't have the programs that maybe could help, like, maybe some community service for some cases, or rehabilitation programs, or restorative justice programs. Like some other countries, these are much more vibrant programs in other countries. We don't necessarily have that. And, honestly though, I get real torn about this because, some people, they need to go to jail. They need to go to jail and prison for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it's just so, I have just mixed feelings. I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes, okay, this person will succeed in this type of program, or this person will not succeed in making that determination. We don't even really do that very well. Well, who's going to benefit from something other than incarceration? We need to have those kind of things in place in a way that we don't now. And we just don't have that. We don't have the other alternatives. So I think that's part of it. And I think also privatization of prisons probably makes makes an incentive to lock people up. I don't know. I've fairly conservative views about, like, they just need to go to prison the rest of their life.
Okay.
I know that's not the right answer for that, but
okay.
And then you have a lot of people that are plea bargaining, and so they're still getting jail time. They may not be getting as much jail time, but most cases that end up in plea bargains, and so that can, add to the, the prison population. And then we have the crime rates. We still have a lot of crime still. So those are all my thoughts on that. Again, I'm not really like whatever would like the policy people and the criminologists that would study that. Those are probably the experts that would have a better idea. And, in a perfect world, I'd love to be able to see that people can be criminals who've done stuff and they can be evaluated, and we can predict that they are going to succeed in something that is an alternative to prison, versus somebody who's just never going to learn their lesson. They need to be locked away. And if we could predict that, and if we could, decide, okay, this person is never going to be rehabilitated, then they can go to prison. This person has a lot of promise. I mean, it's just hard, I think, to predict that. And we don't have those programs in place to really predict that. Just a thought.
Okay.
I'm sure a
All right,
criminologist or sociologist.
That's all right. Well, once again, you've had
wrong.
a lot of time to think about crime and things. Once again, I want to, I don't know what I know, Julia, so I have to ask questions and, get these things out of you. All right. Final general discussion question, then we will wrap this interview up. In general, why do some criminals get away with their crimes? Are there actually perfect crimes, or is it more likely mistakes by investigators?
Well, the concept of a perfect crime would be theoretically that it would be planned and executed so flawlessly that it leaves no evidence and absolutely no leads for detectives or law enforcement. I don't think that is possible at all. I just don't think there is a possibility of committing a perfect crime. Why are some crimes? Why do we think there is? Lack of evidence, lack of or insufficient law enforcement resources. I've already touched on that, more than touched on that. Sophisticated techniques of criminals or get better, and law enforcement always trying to kind of catch up and keep up with them. It's something that is difficult to do. Sometimes they're always one step ahead, and then we need to catch up to that. I've already touched on this as well. Potentially, witness reluctance, witness intimidation. You hit on it. Mistakes of investigators. Sometimes, yes. We're seeing this. We just saw this play out at least partially play out in the trial of Karen Reed, who here in Massachusetts, she was charged with killing her boyfriend by hitting with her car. And we saw a lot of mistakes by investigators. And did that ultimately end or result in a hung jury and not being able to come to a decision? I don't know, because I haven't heard what the jury has said, but it didn't help. I haven't seen a case, although somebody else pointed out a couple other cases to me, but I was thinking back to the OJ case, and I haven't seen a case where, the importance of processing the crime scene, right, has been highlighted so much. And it just shows you make one misstep and I'm not saying that there was only one misstep, but how one misstep can lead to, people not trusting the rest of the investigation. It could be one thing. In this case, I think it was more than one thing. And certainly the behavior of, and the character, frankly, of law enforcement can come into play if you are, not living ethically or talking ethically about the case or talking to people you shouldn't be talking to, that can all come out. I have a story about a former colleague who had sent a text message or an email to another colleague saying that the prosecutors were idiots. And when she was testifying on the stand, it's didn't you say these prosecutors were idiots? And she had to answer to that. So you have to be really careful. So I think there's sometimes mistakes, there's sometimes lack of judgment. So I think all these things contribute sometimes to people getting away with things. Another thing is sometimes not even knowing if that a crime was committed.
Right.
Especially in the cases that you're doing. You don't know many of your cases.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right, for sure. I guess we also have to put in there, maybe there's the element of luck. Sometimes criminals just get lucky. Unlucky for us as law-abiding citizens, but good luck for that person.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked, processed bank robbery scenes where a teller and even a video will show that the robber touched the counter or touched something, and you go to fingerprint it, there's not a fingerprint there. It doesn't lift, or it's smudged, or And that just luck? Is that, it's things like that. And you're like, darn it, so that's just a minor example, but, that you're right. It could just be a matter of luck or and the lack of evidence. You just can't, even though, somebody went in and committed a crime, it may be that we either don't do a good enough job and don't detect the evidence, or we don't have the capability, but there's always something there. No matter what, somebody does something. They go into a room, they leave a room, they've left something and they've taken something away. It's up to us. Are we good enough to detect it? Can we detect it? Sometimes we can, and we're getting better at it. The testing and technology is becoming a lot more sensitive. But is it maybe just too minute? We can't make a determination. And the other thing to consider too is that with technology becoming more sensitive, you're running the risk of detecting something that might even be related to the crime scene, particularly with DNA. With the low amount of DNA that can be detected, you might be dealing with contamination of some sort or transfer, and something that's completely unrelated. So as advanced as we get, that advancement creates pitfalls as well for us and makes sometimes our job a little harder. You could have DNA somewhere, touch DNA, and someone can say, you know what, that was contamination because this person touched this person and this person, and then that has happened, and that is a real thing. And so sometimes technology can work against us as well.
We were talking about luck a little a moment ago, and I think of like the disappearance of Jennifer Cassie, if you're familiar with that disappearance, in which there is a video of somebody parking, abandoning her car, but wouldn't you know, wasn't one of these steady streaming video cameras. It only took a picture every so many seconds, and every time it took a picture of this person walking away, the guy, or they believe it to be a guy's face is behind a bar of a fence.
Is that somebody that was like in a Tyvek suit of some sort?
No, he was just he was just dressed in like white shirts and white pants, and I think in
maybe
black
that's what
shoes.
I'm thinking of.
Jennifer Kessie, here over in Orlando.
Yeah.
She didn't show up for work. Her car ended up being found abandoned, not too far away. In fact, I've been to the very spot where her car was found. And there's a video, like I said, the same day that she went missing, or the next day, car being abandoned, somebody walking off, and of course that disappearance is still unsolved. But pretty sure that if the timing or it had been a better video camera or something, that person's face would have been caught.
Yeah. And you just have to say, what is that? Is it luck? Is it just, it's how it's so frustrating. It is absolutely frustrating. As a detective, you're like, oh, we have video. Oh, great. And then you look at it and you're like, oh,
right.
and then you hope, look, maybe we can put out this, maybe somebody will recognize who this is. You have this hope, and it's so frustrating. And how hard for the family. It's almost like it's right there.
Can't
and
imagine it.
I can't either.
Can't
imagine it. Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the outline, Julia, so I'm just going to ask you any final words before we complete this interview.
I just want to thank you for having me on your show. I think that the work that you're doing is incredible. I'm looking forward to having you on my show as well, and talking about the missing person cases that you've worked on, the disappearances, because while I did work on some, I'm still learning, and I just can't wait to have a chance to talk to you more about that.
I'm looking forward to it tomorrow as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. But again, just thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking with you, Ed.
Yeah, me too. I agree. It's
interesting conversation for sure.
Well, thanks. I try to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
I try to keep it interesting.
I hope your listeners like it.
They love it.
They don't abandon you after this.
No, absolutely not. I have a faithful following.
I'm sure.
No, don't worry about that. I've been talking. I haven't used your name or anything, but I've been saying that I'm going to be interviewing an FBI agent here in the upcoming weeks, and I know they're very interested. And they also know that when I interview people, I ask a lot of in-depth questions, and very technical, and really like to get to know people, and of course, getting to know missing people, of course, getting to know the guests as well. So they know that I'm going to ask a lot of probing questions about their background and everything. So it's probably one of the most complete interviews an FBI agent has ever done, I'm thinking today.
Uh-oh. I could be in a lot of trouble now.
No,
No.
we're not going to let
Yeah.
that happen.
I
Don't
mean,
worry
I
about
do
that.
I do my best. I try to, be honest, but also be careful.
I
It's a
got, I
fine
got it.
line.
I totally
Yeah.
understand, and I think that I handled it in
That's
the right
fine.
way. That I realized that you have many years there. You did a lot, of course, great work and everything. And I realized there's certain things you can't say about some of the work that you did and everything. But everything you can say, I hope you said. So,
I did.
okay.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, great. Well, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. I know we're
Yeah,
going to be talking a lot in the future, and I appreciate you
definitely.
being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was my July 8th, 2024 interview with Julia Cowley, retired FBI agent and profiler. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. And I wasn't kidding. Surely that is the most complete interview an agent has ever done. As a reminder, Julia interviewed me the next day for her podcast, The Consult, and that episode will be coming out within the next month. And yes, it's just as thorough a talk as the one you just heard. Here are some points that jumped out at me during the course of this 3-hour and 40-minute interview. Number 1, the FBI does not take over disappearance cases. It simply gives recommendations. They look over the files, then give their best advice. Then the local police have to make the decision whether to follow that advice or not. Meaning the control of the investigation is always at the state or local level, not the federal one. Point number 2. Even if the FBI is consulted by local law enforcement, cases will often remain unsolved. This is a point that I've mentioned before. The FBI is not a cure-all. Certainly in a perfect world, if the FBI had the time, I wish it would look at all of these missing persons cases. However, this does not automatically mean many more would be resolved. Point number 3. Despite what we've heard from some guests, to Julia's knowledge, she has never known the FBI to turn down consulting on a disappearance. Yes, I joked, kind of being serious, that this probably means that many police departments have lied to many of Unfound's guests. Oh yeah, we tried to get the FBI to look at your loved one's disappearance, but they declined us. But I'll admit, I'm more to the serious side than the joking one on this topic. Point number 4. Even when the FBI takes on disappearances, the occurrences are few and far between. You heard Julia say herself. In her many years of profiling, she looked at maybe 10 cases. That's it. To me, this means we have another situation where although the people perusing the files are experienced in crime in general, they will never become experienced in disappearances specifically, because they're only looking at one file every other year. Nobody could really learn anything about anything at that rate. And point number 5, and this is the last one, despite how many on all sides of the media have portrayed the FBI over the past several years, my high opinion of the Bureau has actually solidified, if not improved, by getting to know Julia. And especially hearing from her that really, despite what the media feeds us, the agents are trying to do the best objective work they can. Remember, they are not robots. They're humans. Before I end this episode, I remind you to check out Julia's podcast, The Consult. You know I don't partake in too much true crime outside of my work on Unfound, because of my attitude toward much of the productions out there. Thus, that I'm recommending her show should really tell you something. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.